Chapter 78. Meng-Chi was dazed for a moment. Even if that voice carried a trace of anger, it was still pleasing and familiar. Even if she died 1,000 times, she would not mistake it. She was certain that this was not her imagination. No matter if it was that time outside Hua Jiangfu or this time, the man's voice was not something she imagined. It was real. Okay, she absent-mindedly responded. The black-robed man looked at her again. What's okay? A mocking smile flashed across his face. Are you going to admit defeat? Never, Meng-Chi said decisively. Great ambition suddenly rose in her chest. So what if the black-robed man was strong? She was not afraid of him. You won't cry until you see the coffin. The black-robed man laughed coldly. He bent down and took a thin and long young branch from the little person he sent out. Don't say that I bullied you. He casually threw a bamboo scroll to Meng-Chi. The 9 herds I need are all on there. I want you to admit defeat. The bamboo scroll was thin and long, greenish-black in color. It was not the yellow bamboo scroll commonly seen in the 3,000 worlds. On the back of the bamboo scroll, there were 3 long and narrow characters carved in ancient script. Meng-Chi's fingers touched it and she read, Ji Wujiong. HM? The black-robed man instinctively turned to look at Meng-Chi. So he was called Ji Wujiong. Meng-Chi quickly searched through her mind. She had never heard of this name before. Such a strong Xiuzhe who came and went with Lu Qingran. She had never heard of him in her previous life. He probably appeared even later and met her Shiji after she died. Ji Wujiong's gaze swept coldly over Meng-Chi. He did not seem to care that she knew his name. He mocked as usual, still standing there like an idiot. You can't wait to call me master? Meng-Chi. She lowered her eyes. In a flash, she memorized the 9 herbs she needed. Relax. The man's voice sounded again, but it was colder than before. Just like last time, Meng-Chi lowered his hands and stood in place, relaxed. Her long hair that was tied behind her head suddenly swayed, and her green robe fluttered. Her entire body moved as fast as the wind. The silver medicine knife was still in her hand, and the chi-chi sound was incessant. The withered grass and trees on the ground flew up. The Meng-Chi did not even need to touch the ground. The sharp aura on the medicine knife quickly drew a complete magic circle on the ground. 2K novels, look carefully. The man's voice was still cold. This formation is called the 1,000 Crane Formation. His is just a modified version of the 100 Ghosts and Charm Formation. Do you think the 100 Ghost Formation can scare you? Yes, Meng-Chi replied in a low voice. She glanced at Ji Wujiong from the corner of her eye. He obviously couldn't hear her voice. He was still standing there leisurely, glancing at Meng-Chi from time to time. She raised her chin slightly, feeling proud and pleased with herself. You're still looking at him? The man's voice grew lower and lower, and it was tainted with a trace of anger that grew more and more obvious. Or, do you want to lose? Meng-Chi pursed his lips and focused on the ground. The magic circle was gradually becoming complete. She memorized these things far faster and more clearly than she could memorize sword techniques or cultivation techniques. The last stroke of the medicine knife sank into the center of the magic circle. Meng-Chi had already memorized the complete 1,000 Crane Formation. Spirit stones, the man said in a low voice again. 8th grade. Meng-Chi hurriedly took out a dozen or so 8th grade spirit stones from her storage bag and held them in her hand. She raised her hand and flicked it lightly. 12 8th grade spirit stones were firmly embedded in the magic circle. In an instant, a light blue light lit up, illuminating Meng-Chi's small face. Ji Wujiong glanced at it and raised his eyebrows in disdain. It's just the 1,000 Crane Formation. It's nothing. What are you doing? Meng-Chi was just about to sigh. Ji Wujiong could be considered experienced and knowledgeable. In the magic circle, countless blue shadows rose into the air and turned into hundreds of goshawks that soared straight into the sky. Unlike the cranes in the name of the formation, these goshawks flapped their wings and flew high. Even their claws and sharp beaks were lifelike. In an instant, the sky was filled with the light and shadows of the goshawks that soared into the sky. The goshawks that spread their wings longer than Meng-Chi's spread arms quickly and swiftly flew in all directions. The thousand crane formation can actually produce such a change. Ji Wujiang glanced at Meng-Chi from the corner of his eyes. Even the disdain that was always on his face was gone. You're really something. It's just a change of formation, huh? In Meng-Chi's mind, the man's voice finally became gentler. She did not know if it was her imagination, but after the anger was gone, there seemed to be a hint of pride in his voice. Meng-Chi remained silent. She looked up at the goshawks that swiftly flew across the sky. Not only did they fly in all directions, but some of them also pounced on the ground and rushed toward the small white ghost shadows that Ji Wujiang summoned. The goshawk did not care if they were Ji Wujiang's puppets. It stretched out its claws and quickly grabbed the herbs that the small ghost shadows found. That was not all. The goshawk lowered its head and pecked at those small ghost shadows. With a soft puff, those small ghost shadows quickly turned into a puff of smoke and disappeared. Then, the goshawk calmly flapped its wings and turned to fly toward Meng-Chi. When it flew in front of her, the goshawk shook its claws and generously threw the herbs that it snatched into her hands. Meng-Chi was dumbfounded. Ji Wujiang was stunned for a moment. He thought that this girl could use the thousand crane formation to summon goshawks only because she could fly and search for spiritual herbs faster. He never expected that Meng-Chi would snatch it in broad daylight. Not only did she snatch it in broad daylight, but she also killed his ghost shadow puppets. This was intolerable. Absolutely intolerable. Ji Wujiang jumped up in anger, and the pitch-black long saber attacked again. With a chi-chi sound, it quickly drew a new formation. 100 ghosts are going to march at night. The man's voice also sounded in Meng-Chi's mind. Is it very powerful? Meng-Chi asked softly. Powerful? The man sneered. It seems that I have to teach him a lesson, so that he won't dare to use formations in front of you from now on. He instructed calmly. Take a Xian spirit stone and hold it in your hand. Meng-Chi nodded and took out the Xian spirit stone as instructed. A real change of formation doesn't require so many empty and useless tricks. By the time he's done, the enemy's saber will have pierced his chest. As the man spoke, he controlled Meng-Chi to move again. His actions were fast and accurate, and the silver medicine saber instantly erased a few lines in the previous formation. The medicine saber was sharp, and in a moment's time, it drew a new and exquisite formation in the center of the original formation. The Xian Spirit Stone lit up, and with a flick of Meng-Chi's finger, the Xian Spirit Stone landed steadily in the center of the formation. A sharp and high-pitched eagle's cry suddenly resounded through the blue sky. The barrier of the competition was originally silent, but at this moment, it seemed like it was about to be torn apart. In the center of the formation drawn by Meng-Chi, a huge, lifelike goshawk swiftly rose from the ground and rushed into the sky. Ji Wujiang suddenly looked over. Only then did Meng-Chi see that the other party's eyes had unknowingly turned blood red. Even the 3 strange scars on his face were emitting traces of red light. In front of Ji Wujiang, countless white shadows were originally slowly crawling up. The eagle's cry resounded through the clouds, and those shadows seemed to be shocked and froze in place. Meng-Chi could even see those ghostly white shadows looking up at the sky. Blood moon. In Meng-Chi's mind, the man said again, throw it into the sky. Without any time to think, she took out the blood moon from her storage bag and threw it into the sky. That huge goshawk suddenly swooped down and took the blood moon with its mouth. Another eagle's cry resounded through the world, as if it was going to tear the entire barrier, and even heaven and earth seemed to shake. The man's voice finally had a faint smile. This blood moon is only 1,000 years old, and it's useless. In the future, I'll find a 10,000-year-old blood moon for you. Chapter 79. Meng-Chi didn't even have time to feel sorry for the blood moon. She looked up at the sky. Under the blue sky, a huge and strong goshawk spread its wings. It really had the aura of covering the sky and the sun. Although it was just a shadow, even the feathers on its wings seemed to be distinct and sharp, pointing at the ghostly shadow on the ground. Meng-Chi turned to look at Ji Wujiang. The other party's eyes were blood red, and the wound on his face was faintly red, as if it would burn in the next moment. The pitch-black narrow saber in his hand was slanted to the ground. His lips kept moving, and no one knew what he was chanting. Insignificant skill. In Meng-Chi's mind, the man's voice became lazy. You can think about what you wanted to do in the next 24 hours. His tone was relaxed, and Meng-Chi subconsciously outlined her master's appearance in her mind. The white-robed man had his hair tied up and wore a crown with wide sleeves. Not only was his appearance far superior to that of a banished immortal, but his temperament was also like that of an immortal. He liked spring afternoons the most. The wooden recliner under the peach blossom tree was covered with a soft cushion. Beside it was a small black table with seasonal fresh fruits. He lay lazily on the recliner, half-closed his starry eyes, and lazily watched Meng-Chi cultivate. That kind of time was the most tranquil and beautiful period of her life. Hearing the man's casual and calm voice, Meng-Chi's eyebrows also relaxed. In contrast, Ji Wujiang's red eyes and even the wound on his face turned red. It was obvious who was superior. Ji Wujiang was clearly much stronger than her, but Meng-Chi didn't know why, but her whole body relaxed. She suddenly wasn't afraid of anything. She could fearlessly face all the difficulties and obstacles in front of her. Meng-Chi's lips curled up slightly, and her smile relaxed her eyebrows. Ji Wujiang glared at her coldly and snorted softly. In an instant, the formation in front of him exploded violently. Those ghostly white shadows suddenly merged into a ball and then grew bigger and bigger. Finally, a strong white arm emerged from the ground. A giant supported himself on the ground and slowly stood up. "Ha!" The man laughed lazily. "Ha!" Ji Wujiang laughed coldly. Meng-Chi stood solemnly as he held several Xian spirit stones in his hand. She had extorted 3,000 Xian spirit stones from the Wind Alliance. At this time, she was rich and overbearing. She was also supporting her Shirzhen to win Ji Wujiang, so she was very generous. Another eagle cry resounded in the sky. The goshawk suddenly swooped down, its sharp claws extended as it pounced on the huge, ghostly white figure. Although the ghostly white shadow was huge, it was far less agile than the goshawk. Moreover, one of them was in the air. His movements were swift and sharp, and he could dive down at any time. In the blink of an eye, the gigantic, ghostly white figure was forced to retreat, and even had to dodge in a sorry state. Watch his movements clearly. The man suddenly reminded Meng-Chi. Yes, Meng-Chi looked at Ji Wujiang as instructed. The narrow blade in his hand was carved on the ground, as if he was drawing a new formation. Meng-Chi's right hand hung by his side, and he quickly drew the same trajectory in the air as his narrow blade's movements. Ji Wujiang raised his narrow blade, and Meng-Chi happened to draw the best stroke. "Have you memorized it?" The man asked gently. "Yes." Meng-Chi nodded obediently. "But I don't recognize it. This guy might be a fiendish cultivator." The man said, "Memorize it first, and I'll teach you slowly." "Okay." Meng-Chi was startled for a moment, then responded softly. It was clearly a simple sentence, but her nose felt sour, and even her eyes felt a little hot. She shouldn't have thought so much just because of Ji Wujiang's words. Shirzhen was clearly the best. Meng-Chi quickly blinked, blinking away the mist that rose in her eyes. The fight between the fly and the ghostly white figure in front of them was nearing its end. Ji Wujiang suddenly cursed, stabbed his narrow blade into the ground, and turned his head to look coldly at Meng-Chi. The red color in his eyes gradually faded, and the wound on his face turned black again. Ji Wujiang's eyes became clear, and he looked coldly at Meng-Chi. "You win." "Ah." Meng-Chi asked curiously, "Where's your new formation? Aren't you going to activate it?" "I'm out of spirit stones." Ji Wujiang snorted coldly. As his voice fell, the ghostly white figure really did slowly fade. The goshawk let out a long cry, and its sharp claws flipped the white figure. Just like the little ghost before, with a soft puff sound, the The huge, ghostly white figure turned into a puff of smoke and disappeared in the wind. The goshawk spiraled into the sky, and the other goshawks that were much smaller than it began to return from all directions. Other than the two kinds of medicine that they had snatched from Ji Wujiang, they quickly brought back the other spirit herbs and flowers that could cure the 7-object poison, and obediently placed them in Meng Qi's hands. Ji Wujiang snorted coldly and turned his head away from Meng Qi. He actually had some spirit stones on him during this period of time. Other than the spirit stones that Lu Qing ran owed the Xiuzhou Alliance, he still had about 100 8th grade spirit stones left. For most Xiuzhou, that could be used for a long time. Ji Wujiang had never worried about spirit stones in his life, and had never thought that it would be difficult to move around in the 3,000 worlds without spirit stones. It was only when he was forced into such a sorry state by Su Qian outside Huajiang Manor because of Lu Qing Rant's debt, and it happened to be when he was at his weakest that he began to prepare some spirit stones on him. Just now, when he was fighting Meng Qi, especially in the last battle for the formation, he had casually tossed out all of his spirit stones. The new formation was drawn, but there were no more spirit stones to activate it. This was the second time that Ji Wujiang was stumped by spirit stones, and both times it was because of Meng Qi. Meng Qi raised her eyebrows and smiled lightly. Her mood was really very good. Winning against Ji Wujiang was only one of the reasons, and it was also the most unimportant one. She summoned the small cauldron, and threw all of the spirit herbs and flowers in satisfaction. Then Meng Qi looked up at Ji Wujiang. No spirit stones? Her voice was light, and she had a faint smile. You know you can't beat me, so you might as well. Ugh. Before she finished speaking, a chill seemed to seep out from her spirit ocean. Then, the spirit energy in her body seemed to be sucked dry, and everything in front of her became blurry. Ugh. Meng Qi groaned again, and her vision suddenly turned black, and her body fell down softly. Faith! Ji Wujiang turned his head and saw this scene. He instinctively took a step forward and looked at the unconscious green-robed girl. The other party's plain little face was deathly pale. Her long eyelashes drooped, and her thin body fell to the ground, looking quite delicate and pitiful. But Meng Qi's smile hadn't disappeared yet. She didn't finish speaking just now, but Ji Wujiang couldn't be more clear about what she wanted to say. She just wanted to say that she couldn't beat her, so she found an excuse to admit defeat. Was he that kind of person? Ji Wujiang leaned over, and the slightly cool sleeve of his black robe swept across Meng Qi's cheek. A faint light flickered on his slender fingers, and a bit of spell light illuminated the girl's fair and elegant cheek. She overused her spirit energy. Ji Wujiang's eyes flashed slightly. It was no wonder that Meng Qi, a foundation-building cultivator, refused to admit defeat and wanted to fight him head-on. She should be glad that he didn't want to use his power to bully others. So he used a formation to determine the winner, and not an attack formation, but a direct attack on her. Otherwise, even if there were 100 Meng Qis, they would have been reduced to ashes. Ji Wujiang spread his robe sleeves and stood up. His gaze fell on the small bronze cauldron Meng Qi was refining medicine on the ground. The small cauldron looked very crude, and was the most common one on the market, the lowest grade small cauldron that ordinary medical cultivators would use. There was nothing strange about it. Compared to the powerful and profound formation cultivation that Meng Qi displayed, the things she used were too simple. Has the 3,000 worlds now become so ignorant of good and evil, and inverted the hierarchy? Ji Wujiang's gaze swept across Meng Qi's still pale little face, and looked at the simple green robe on her body, and muttered. He didn't have spirit stones, so he couldn't even refine medicine, so he simply sat down cross-legged beside Meng Qi. In order to fight with her just now, Ji Wujiang had consumed a lot of energy. He closed his eyes and clasped his hands together, and the spiritual energy in his body began to circulate rapidly. However, every time it completed a cycle and returned to the spiritual sea, he would unconsciously frown. In just a moment, fine beads of sweat had already appeared on Ji Wujiang's forehead, and the back of his black robe was gradually soaked with sweat. When other cultivators cultivated, Every time their spiritual energy completed a cycle, they would return to the spiritual sea. That feeling was always wonderful and comfortable. However, Ji Woojeong seemed to be enduring incomparably great pain, and in the end, his sweat even poured down. In the barrier, a breeze blew, and the grass and trees rustled. The blue sky was always bright, and there was no distinction between day and night. Meng Qi didn't know how long she had been unconscious. When she opened her eyes, her surroundings were still very bright. Her small bronze cauldron was not far in front of her, and it was within reach. Ugh, she moved her body. Her spiritual sea was still aching faintly, but the bone-chilling coldness that seemed to have been sucked out had disappeared. It seemed to be the same last time. Meng Qi slowly sat up with one hand on the ground. Last time outside Huajiangfu, it had been the same. She had overdrawn her spiritual energy, and her spiritual sea had been shaken. She had also been unconscious for a long time before she finally recovered. She looked down at her hand and instinctively looked around. "Shirzhen," she tried to call out softly in her mind. As expected, the man's voice did not appear again. If it wasn't for the fact that her spiritual sea was still aching faintly, the Ling medicines and flowers that she had thrown in before she fainted would still be in the small bronze cauldron beside her. YYXS. Meng Qi almost thought that everything that had happened before was just a dream. "Hey!" A pair of long black boots stopped in front of her. Meng Qi raised her head and met Ji Woojeong's eyes. She turned her head away in disappointment and stood up unsteadily. Ji Woojeong snorted coldly, and for once did not speak sarcastically. Meng Qi took a deep breath. She drew a formation around the small bronze cauldron and threw in a few Ling stones. The flames of the formation rose and instantly surrounded the small bronze cauldron. In just a moment, a medicinal fragrance wafted out of the small cauldron. It was bitter and slightly astringent, with the unique smell of the grassland, and surrounded the two of them. Ji Woojeong. Did he see wrongly? This fellow used the fire formation to refine an antidote. Ji Woojeong looked at the formation on the ground that Meng Qi used to refine medicine with a complicated expression. Then he looked at her. He also knew how to use the fire formation. This was not the original formation, but a modified one. But using it to refine medicine, well, it didn't seem impossible. Very good. This arrogance finally made him admire her a little. He no longer felt angry when he looked at Meng Qi. Meng Qi focused on refining medicine, although she knew that her Shirzhen had helped her teach Ji Woojeong a good lesson again. But the other party left immediately, and she didn't have time to say anything. She didn't know when he would appear again. She looked at the brilliant flames on the fire formation in front of her, and her gaze became a little dazed. The ecstasy she felt before she fainted slowly faded as the other party disappeared again. He clearly said that he would find her a blood moon and slowly teach her Ji Woojeong's formations. When Meng Qi thought of this, she picked up a withered branch completely subconsciously and casually drew the last formation that Ji Woojeong drew. That formation was quite complicated. The lines overlapped and went back and forth. It was actually quite difficult to draw it in one go and connect it into a formation in the end. Meng Qi didn't inject any spirit energy. She was completely copying the formation's shape. This way, even if spirit stones were embedded at the back, it couldn't be activated. Ji Woojeong was originally standing at the side. At first, he only glanced at Meng Qi from the corner of his eyes from time to time. Later, he saw her drawing the formation with a withered branch on the ground. He didn't know what she was thinking with her head lowered, so he simply watched her draw openly. Then, he saw her holding the withered branch in her hand. When the last stroke landed, it just happened to close into a ring and connect into a complete formation. Ji Woojeong. He was a little speechless. Didn't they say that the trichiliocosm formation was on the decline and that it barely rose again hundreds of years ago? Until now, it still couldn't compete with sword cultivators and spell cultivators, and had only been reduced to tools for weapon cultivators to refine artifacts and weapons. How could a small foundation, establishment cultivator, know so many formations? He was simply caught off guard. "Hey!" Ji Woojeong lowered himself and squatted down opposite the small bronze cauldron. He looked straight into Meng Qi's eyes. Have you learned this formation before? What? Meng Qi came back to her senses. She glanced at the formation she drew. No, she said matter-of-factly. Wasn't this the formation you drew earlier? Then, you said that you didn't have any spirit stones and didn't activate it, right? I don't know it. Ji Wujiong. He wasn't angry after being mocked a little. It was rare that he didn't retort. He looked into Meng Qi's eyes. The green-robed girl had been unconscious for 14 to 16 hours. When she woke up, she began to refine medicine. She was sad and unhappy. She didn't have the slightest joy of winning against him. Then, she said that she hadn't learned this formation before. But she picked up a withered branch and drew such a complicated formation with just one stroke. A strange look suddenly flashed in Ji Wujiong's eyes. He looked at Meng Qi with a burning gaze, his eyes full of disbelief. Just now, he frowned, still feeling a little incredulous. You were so far away. You saw me draw it once, and you could draw a formation? He saw clearly just now that Meng Qi drew it in one breath. If she injected spiritual aura and drew this formation with spiritual aura, I'm afraid she couldn't. She was only in the foundation establishment realm. If she really used that little bit of spiritual aura to draw this formation, she wouldn't even be able to draw 1/10 of it before her spiritual aura was exhausted. Ji Wujiong stared at Meng Qi for a moment and suddenly stood up. He seemed to have something hard to decide. He paced back and forth in front of Meng Qi, somewhat anxiously. Meng Qi. Ji Wujiong stopped and looked down at Meng Qi. Have you learned the study of formations from beginning to end? Meng Qi shook her head. He knew it. Whether it was Meng Qi drawing a formation with a withered branch or the way she drew the thousand crane formation before, he knew it. He only needed to glance at her to know that this guy definitely hadn't learned the study of formations systematically and completely. But the more this was the case, the more tempting it was. Cough, cough. Ji Wujiong paced back and forth again and coughed a few times. He finally succeeded in making Meng Qi look up at him. Since we have nothing to do anyway, let me tell you the history of formations. Ji Wujiong's tone was suddenly no longer as sarcastic as before. Meng Qi's gaze was strange, and she reminded him, we have to pass the test of the barrier as soon as possible and leave here. Have you forgotten? Cough, cough, cough. Ji Wujiong coughed a few more times. Aren't we waiting to refine medicine? This time, he didn't give Meng Qi a chance to refute him. He continued, tens of thousands of years ago, there were mighty figures in the Trichiliacosm, the demon world, and the demon world who were good at formations. At that time, sword cultivators and dharma cultivators were still as powerful as they are now, running amok in the three realms. However, those who specialize in formations, when they reach the pinnacle, can fight against multiple sword shio and spell shio of the same realm by themselves. They are very powerful. Meng Qi. Then what about medical cultivators? Medical cultivators are quite. Ji Wujiong looked at Meng Qi's clear eyes and changed the topic. They have always stood aloof from worldly affairs and were kind to others. They are indispensable. Meng Qi. It sounded a little fake. Ji Wujiong actually used 3 words of praise to praise medical practitioners in one breath, which was completely different from his previous style. Just from his attitude towards the medical cultivators, the Win Alliance, and other medical cultivators, one could see his disdain for medical cultivators. But medical cultivators never liked to participate in battles. Ji Wujiong continued. So the sword cultivators, dharma cultivators, and shioja who studied formations roamed the world at that time. He paused and then slowly said, at that time, the shioja who specialized in formations were called formation shio. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. Sword cultivators, dharma cultivators, and formation shio divided the world. No one could truly suppress the other. Also, the world was chaotic at that time. The 3 realms had not been completely separated. Yao Shio, Mo Shio, and human Shio often fought. There were countless conflicts in the world. Murderous energies filled the air, and there were bloody battlefields everywhere. The Rare Paradise Realm and Mahayana Realm Shioja often fought for 7 days and 7 nights. The world was filled with blood, and the sun, moon, and stars were dim. Meng Qi's attention was gradually drawn, and he listened attentively. Ji Wujiang was exceptionally knowledgeable. Meng Qi could detect it from his sarcastic words. He didn't expect the other to be so good at telling stories when he was not sarcastic. And then, Meng Qi asked again. Ji Wujiang turned to look at her, and the corners of his lips curled up. There were scars on his face. He originally looked cold and arrogant, and his actions were secretive and extreme. Even when he was forced to cooperate with Meng Qi, his words were sarcastic, and his face was full of disdain. After the battle just now, Meng Qi fought him to the end as a Zhuji Xiuzhe. Ji Wujiang did not lie. If he still had spirit stones, he was confident he would not lose. The other was just a Zhuji Xiuzhe. He lacked spirit stones, and Meng Qi did not have enough Ling energy. In reality, no matter if it was the 3,000 worlds, the demon world, or the Yao world, the strong were always more worthy of respect and worship. After this battle, Ji Wujiang did not find Meng Qi so displeasing to the eye. Later, he found that the other had an extremely rare talent in formations. He instantly found Meng Qi more pleasing to the eye. Ji Wujiang coughed lightly again. There are few people who cultivate formations, and it is not easy to pass them down. Why? Meng Qi asked. As long as the formation scrolls are recorded on bamboo slips, the later generations can learn them even if they copy them. On the other hand, it is not enough to just record spells and sword techniques. Without the guidance of a master, it is very difficult to learn. She asked, why is it not easy to pass them down? Ji Wujiang, so good that he was sure that Meng Qi did indeed have an extraordinary talent in formations. Otherwise, how could he say something like that? When that person taught you formations, he should have said that when drawing a formation, the spirit energy cannot be cut off and must be completed in one go. Otherwise, the formation cannot be formed. Not only was Ji Wujiang not angry, he became even more patient. Yes, Meng Qi nodded. This is the difficulty of passing down formations. Sometimes, if there is a slight deviation, the formation may fail. The more complicated the formation, the more this is the case, Ji Wujiang continued. This is like the moves of a sword technique, the one you were practicing before. Ji Wujiang did not recognize the sword technique that was too inferior to him. Although you remember it, can you use the entire sword technique? Meng Qi. She really could not use it. Even if she could force the movements to be correct, she would lose the power of the sword technique. She understood when Ji Wujiang said this. Of course. Ji Wujiang quickly glanced at her and said, this is not your fault. Every cultivator's talent is different. You just do not have the talent to become a sword cultivator. His tone was slightly stiff as he said with difficulty, no need to be sad about this. Meng Qi. Did she hear wrong? Ji Wujiang did not say this before. He had mocked her before, saying that her choice to become a medical cultivator was the best decision because the sword cultivator and spell cultivator sects would not tolerate her and would chase her out of the sect the next day. Ji Wujiang ignored Meng Qi's shocked expression and continued. There are many paths for cultivators. Choosing the right path is the most important. Meng Qi. She was completely dazed as she stared unblinkingly at Ji Wujiang. Cough, cough. Your formation studies are not bad. I didn't know that your cultivation talent was so. Ji Wujiang paused for a moment and said, there's some spiritual qi in the formation. Oh. Meng Qi responded. Right now, the arrays of the 3,000 sectors are declining. Those idiotic equipment cultivators have finally obtained some heritages, but they are short-sighted and can only waste the treasures recklessly. They hide in their sects to practice magical equipment and weapons. As Ji Wujiang spoke, he glanced at the fiery formation that Meng Qi was using to refine medicine. They could not be mentioned in the same breath. Meng Qi could change the fiery formation. She could also casually use such a powerful fiery formation for her own use and retain some of its true essence. This talent was really amazing. He ignored the endless flames of the fiery formation and continued. Formation cultivators should be the same as sword cultivators and spell cultivators. They are powerful enough to dominate the world. The great Tao of formation cultivators is also vast and vast. It will not lose to any of them. The person who taught you the art of formations. Ji Wujiang looked at Meng Qi. He should have also seen that you have talent in formations. Unfortunately, he was short-sighted and prejudiced, so he did not see through you. He's not. Meng Qi suddenly stood up. Her eyes were wide open, and there seemed to be a fiery formation burning in her eyes. She looked at Ji Wujiang angrily. He is a high mountain and is even more open-minded. He has never been prejudiced by the difference in status. Whether it is in formations or other aspects, he is extremely powerful. I am not good enough, so I am not qualified to be his disciple. Meng Qi took a deep breath. She was rarely so angry. Fine, fine, fine. Ji Wujiang admitted defeat. He is very strong, very perfect, very powerful. Meng Qi glanced at him coldly and suddenly said, "You lost the bet just now." Yes. Ji Wujiang admitted it straightforwardly. The original bet was to listen to the winner's instructions for 24 hours, but you were unconscious for 16 hours. But I don't bully little girls. Let's count from now on. Okay, Meng Qi said. From now on, every time you speak, you must add a sentence. She paused. I am far inferior to the person who taught Meng Qi the formation. He is too strong. I am sincerely convinced. Chapter 80. Ji Wujiang sneered and paced back and forth. I can stop saying that he's bad, but I'm sincerely convinced. He snorted coldly. Don't even think about it. Meng Qi squatted down again and stared at the small bronze cauldron in front of her seriously. The spirit stones embedded in the great fire formation gradually dimmed, and the flames also slowly became smaller. Around the bronze cauldron, white smoke began to rise in spirals. The medicinal fragrance gradually became stronger, and a slightly bitter smell spread in all directions. Ji Wujiang stood still. Seeing that Meng Qi's little face was no longer sullen, he continued, in ancient times, formation cultivators dominated the world, and once commanded the wind and the clouds, causing people's expressions to change. They did not lose to spell cultivators and sword cultivators. It's a pity that their inheritance gradually disappeared. Many ancient great formations were destroyed and never appeared again. The formation cultivators of the 3,000 worlds gradually declined, and in the end, there were no more formation cultivators, and they were replaced by weapon cultivators. Ha! Ji Wujiang mocked. A group of incompetent people who can only refine weapons and do other people's work. What right do they have to call themselves the successors of the study of formations? They probably have long forgotten that their ancestors were also strong people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with sword cultivators and spell cultivators. Now, they only know how to bow down to others. He curled his lips, and his face was full of disdain. Shame. Ji Wujiang paused and leaned over to look at Meng Qi. Meng Qi, you do have some talent in formations, but you don't have a chance to learn formations systematically. She loved reading books. He changed his words in time to avoid making the little girl unhappy again. After Ji Wujiang finished speaking, he looked at Meng Qi and waited for her to continue. Meng Qi's eyes were focused on the small bronze cauldron in front of her. The last wisp of flame from the great fire formation disappeared under the cauldron. With a soft poof, the lid of the small cauldron jumped up and then fell back onto the small cauldron. The medicinal fragrance wafted over, and wisps of light green smoke rose from the small cauldron. Meng Qi was silent. She took out a big box from her storage bag and put all the medicinal liquid in the small cauldron into the box. She put away the small bronze cauldron and turned to walk in the direction she came from. While she was doing these things, she did not look at Ji Wujiang at all. It was as if he was invisible. Ji Wujiang, Meng Qi walked quickly. From entering the grand tournament, to discovering the 7 objects powder, to fighting Ji Wujiang, to losing consciousness, to refining medicine, in the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. She didn't know how many more checkpoints were waiting for them. She also wanted to get out as soon as possible. She didn't know if Xikong Xing and the others were worried about her now. Hey! Ji Wujiang was stunned for a moment and quickly caught up with Meng Qi. Why aren't you talking? Meng Qi still acted as if he did not hear anything. She carried the box and walked for about an hour. She could already see the surging river in the distance, and the sound of splashing water entered her ears. Meng Qi looked around. They were already in the middle of the barren land. Then how should the antidote be used? If a cultivator was poisoned, then the antidote should naturally be used by the cultivator. The soil here was probably poisoned, so the plants were withered and their vitality was cut off. Meng Qi hesitated for a moment. There was enough medicine, but this place was so vast. Her brow furrowed slightly as she looked around. Ji Wujiang was standing behind her. He could see that this girl was angry at him, just because he refused to do as she said. Although it was a bit wrong to go back on his words. However, it was impossible for him, Ji Wujiang, to say that he was sincerely convinced by a stranger. Ji Wujiang also found that Meng Qi clearly could not think of a way to detoxify such a vast land. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked calmly at Meng Qi. He had a way. As long as she asked, he could teach her and let her truly see the power of formations. Meng Qi stood where she was for a while and then suddenly took out her silver medicine knife from her storage pouch. Hiss. Meng Qi started to draw formations on the ground. She actually thought of it. Ji Wujiang's expression was slightly complicated. He still stood where he was, but his gaze couldn't help but look at the formation that Meng Qi was drawing. Ji Wujiang stilled. Wasn't this the transformation of the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation that he had just drawn? It could summon little ghosts and ghostly shadows for one's own use. Ji Wujiang stilled. He had actually created this transformation formation himself. Many formation cultivators would create their own transformation formations, and if one method was mastered, then all methods would be mastered. Maybe, since the person who taught Meng Qi formations recognized the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation, it was not strange that they could create their own transformation formations. Maybe they just thought of the same place. While Ji Wujiang thought so, when he thought of how Meng Qi could draw the entire formation with just a glance from afar, he still felt slightly moved. He watched as Meng Qi finished drawing the transformation of the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation and started to draw a new formation. 6 small formations were superimposed around the main formation. Ji Wujiang looked with slight shock at the 6 small formations. Her thoughts were a bit too thorough. Meng Qi did not draw quickly. After she finished drawing the transformation of the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation, she stopped and ate a dark north dan to recover her Ling energy. After that, the 6 minor spirit designs also stopped 3 times to eat the dark north pill. Ji Wujiang was both angry and amused. He had almost forgotten that Meng Qi was a Zhuji. Meng Qi put away her medicine knife and looked at the formations on the ground. She nodded in satisfaction. Even though she had used Ji Wujiang's formations, she could not think of a better way at the moment and could only make do. Meng Qi divided the antidote to the 7 substances powder into 6 portions. She took out a porcelain bottle from her storage pouch that contained normal clear water. Meng Qi mixed the 6 portions of antidote into the clear water and placed them at the center of the 6 small formations. She took out a handful of 8th grade Ling stones and flicked them into the formations. With a light hum, the 7 formations lit up with faint light. All of the formations were activated. Mist started to rise from the center of the main formation. But unlike Ji Wujiang's formation, the mist was not white, but a faint green. The little ghosts gradually grew limbs and heads. Their bodies were made from a faint green liquid. When they moved, they looked like glass dolls and were much cuter than the ghosts that Ji Wujiang had summoned. Go! Meng Qi flicked out several more 8th grade Ling stones and inserted them into the main formation. The ghostly shadows that looked like glass dolls didn't know how to speak. They just ran in all directions at lightning speed. The grasslands were vast, but there was an endless stream of little ghosts coming out. They would probably run to all of the poison places in a short while. Meng Qi nodded in satisfaction. She still had a handful of Ling stones in her hand in case she needed them. Ji Wujiang sighed in amazement as he watched. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. To be able to draw his formations with a glance, this kind of talent was outstanding. It was worth his attitude towards her to be slightly better. But now, his gaze swept across the 7 formations that were stacked together on the ground. Meng Qi could think of layering this kind of basic serene water formation around the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation. The little ghosts that were summoned like this would be completely made of water. She had mixed the antidote into the water beforehand, so that these little ghosts could take it and run to all of the poison lands. This kind of thought, Ji Wujing fell silent. His gaze was deep as he stared at Meng Qi without blinking. Actually, he was not sure. This was the first time Meng Qi had done this. He was not even sure if Meng Qi knew how to change the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation before. Ji Wujing opened his mouth, but found that Meng Qi's gaze swept across his face again. Then, he turned away as if nothing had happened. He was completely treating him like air. The person who taught you the formation is indeed impressive. Ji Wujing was silent for a moment and said slowly, "If I can meet him in the future, I am quite interested in fighting him. I hope he can really convince me." This was already the limit of what he could do. Meng Qi's expression was indifferent. He lowered his eyes and looked at the formation. Even his eyelashes did not flutter. Ji Wujing. Meng Qi, don't think that I'm really afraid of this competition barrier. Believe it or not, I'll kill you right now. As he spoke, his figure blurred, and he was already standing next to Meng Qi. The pitch-black narrow knife was raised and placed horizontally on her fair and slender neck. However, Meng Qi did not move at all. The icy intent on the narrow knife stimulated her skin. Tiny goosebumps appeared on her originally smooth neck. Ji Wujing's murderous intent filled the air. A vicious look flashed across his eyes. Meng Qi's eyes were still lowered, as if he did not even care about life and death. Ji Wujing finally understood that some people really had a reverse scale. Once touched, they would protect it to the end even if they had to die. Ji Wujing withdrew his narrow knife. Although he was still somewhat unsatisfied, he admired Meng Qi's stubbornness and persistence. Why was he not so lucky? He did not meet this obedient disciple who was extremely talented in formations, serious, and persevering. Ji Wujing took a few steps back and put away his narrow knife. "All right, I'm not as good as the person who taught you formations. He's too strong. I'm sincerely convinced." He paused and said, "Of course, I'll still fight with him in the future. I hope that when the time comes, he can also convince me." Ji Wujing added coldly, "Umph." Meng Qi snorted softly and finally looked Ji Wujing in the eye. "He'll definitely convince you. From now on, you won't dare to talk about formations anymore." She subconsciously used the words that person had said earlier. Meng Qi's eyelids drooped slightly. The other party always appeared suddenly and then disappeared. Every time she was in danger, he was like a heavenly soldier. After the danger passed, he disappeared again. Perhaps she was even stronger. So strong that someone like Ji Wujing would no longer say that it was embarrassing for him to take her in as a disciple. He probably wouldn't leave. Meng Qi's eyes flashed with sadness, but they quickly became firm again. Of course, she would not let Ji Wujing discover this. She looked into the distance and realized that the small, ghostly shadows had already run in all directions. They also brought the antidote in all directions. The barrier of the competition was just a test. It had similarities and differences with the real 3,000 worlds. Whether it was the 7 objects powder or the antidote formula, it was the same as the 3,000 worlds. Once they passed the test, the effect of the medicine would be much faster. Wherever the ghostly shadows passed, it was as if spring had returned to the earth. Young grass and leaves slowly emerged from the ground. In just a short moment, the entire grassland was filled with specks of light and was once again filled with greenery. Further away, the ghostly shadows circled around the withered trees that had been leveled up. The branches trembled slightly. New leaves grew on the branches, and they slowly regained their vitality. 15 minutes later, the dead land that was just withered and yellow had become full of vitality again. Meng Qi looked around, her heart surging. Such a magical barrier should be supported by some kind of formation that could not be destroyed for tens of thousands of years. It was so miraculous. This place, as if he had guessed Meng Qi's thoughts, Ji Wujiang walked to her side and pointed to the ground. There should be a formation spirit guarding it. Meng Qi raised her eyebrows and looked at Ji Wujiang. You don't know what a formation spirit is? Ji Wujiang sneered and said that he shut his mouth abruptly. Looking at Meng Qi's darkened expression, he continued slowly, that founding ancestor of the formation cultivator is a great talent who can change the world. The mountains, rivers, and the forms of living beings can all be turned into his own. At this moment, vines suddenly grew wildly in the center of the grassland that was gradually recovering its vitality. The vines grew faster and faster. Finally, they intertwined to form the shape of a door. A few flowers bloomed on the door. Let's talk as we walk. Ji Wujiang motioned for Meng Qi to come forward. The two walked in front of the door, made of intertwined vines. 7 flowers of different colors suddenly bloomed in unison. Among the flowers, there were not stamens. Some were bamboo scrolls, some were jade scrolls, some were porcelain bottles, and there was also something that looked like a very small talisman. Among the other 2 flowers, there were rare Ling medicines. This should be the reward for passing the first test, Ji Wujiang said. And Meng Qi nodded. She knew this. On the bamboo scrolls that Xue Jinwen had given her, it was recorded that if one could pass the test of the barrier, even if they were not accepted by the large sects in the end, they would still be able to enter the sect. Just the rewards that could be obtained from this were very impressive. According to the rules, the 7 shoujo with the best performance each time they passed the test could choose a reward. Meng Qi's gaze swept across the 7 flowers one by one. There should be rare Ling medicines in the porcelain bottle. The talisman must also be a divine item. The Ling medicines in the other 2 flowers were also natural treasures that Meng Qi had only seen in books. There were also bamboo scrolls and jade scrolls. She hesitated and finally reached out to take out a jade scroll from one of the flowers. Meng Qi closed her eyes and sent some Ling energy into the jade scroll. Ah! She suddenly exclaimed in surprise. There was a very rare medical spell recorded in the jade scroll. Meng Qi had seen it in a book before. Unfortunately, she had asked around for a long time before finding out that this spell had been lost in the catastrophe more than 2,000 years ago. She had not expected that she would obtain it in the barrier of the tournament. Meng Qi happily put the spell into her storage pouch. It seemed that this place was really left behind by the ancient great powers. That was why these lost spells appeared. With this gain, she suddenly felt that it was not a bad thing to be caught off guard and sent into the barrier of the tournament. Even though Ji Wujiang would probably do as he said and kill her as soon as they left here. But what was that saying? If one hears the truth in the morning, one can die without regrets in the evening. Meng Qi was instantly satisfied, and her face was slightly joyful. There was undisguised joy in the corners of her eyes. Ji Wujiang snorted softly and casually took out a bamboo scroll from another flower. Pill recipe. He glanced and threw the bamboo scroll to Meng Qi. Take it. I don't have the patience to make medicine. Ha! Meng Qi's hand felt cold. The bamboo scroll had been shoved into her hand. But don't be long-winded, Ji Wujiang said. If you don't want it, throw it away. Then, Meng Qi hesitated and took out the jade scroll. She had not wanted to share this spell with Ji Wujiang, but the other had generously given the pill recipe to her. She couldn't take advantage of others for free. This is a medical spell recipe. Meng Qi put the jade scroll in Ji Wujiang's hand. More than 2,000 years ago, the inheritance was cut off, and this spell recipe was lost. I did not expect to encounter it here. Give me the pill recipe, and I will show you the spell recipe. Ji Wujiang was about to refuse and say that he was not interested. He glanced at Meng Qi's serious little face out of the corner of his eye. He knew that the other party probably really wanted the pill recipe. All right. He waved his hand and sent a bit of spirit energy into the jade scroll. After a while, Ji Wujiang returned the jade scroll to Meng Qi. It's done. Meng Qi put away the jade scroll and the bamboo scroll that recorded the pill recipe. She had a special cloud brocade pouch in her storage bag to store these things. The cloud brocade pouch was different from what Xiozha usually used to store ling stones. She had spent a lot of ling stones to buy it at the Cloud Immortal Pavilion. The pouch was made from sky silkworm silk mixed with the leaves of blaze grass and the hair of 2 great sky Yao from the Yao world. It was impervious to fire and water. Supposedly, it could protect the jade scrolls and bamboo scrolls in the pouch even under the pressure of the barrier. Meng Qi put the jade scrolls and bamboo scrolls into the cloud brocade pouch. This way, if something happened to her, at least these things could be preserved. After the two took the rewards they had chosen, the other 5 colored flowers on the vine-woven door slowly dissipated. A blurry voice sounded in their ears. "Good." The door made of interwoven vines opened in front of the two. Meng Qi looked over and saw a patch of darkness in front of her, as though she had entered a void. It was chaotic, and she could not see the end. She took a deep breath and stepped through the door. Cold wind blew and cut across her face. Even her long robe flapped in the wind. Meng Qi carefully put down her foot and quickly stepped on solid ground. She took another deep breath and stepped through the door with her other foot. She did not need to walk forward at all. She felt her eyes light up. Under the blue sky and white clouds, flowers bloomed and the trees were green. Butterflies danced on the flowers. Not far away, there was a waterfall on a tall mountain that fell into an enormous pool at the foot of the mountain. What Meng Qi stepped on was fine and soft green grass. It was soft. Compared to the black soil and the withered and yellow grasslands, this place was like a paradise. Ji Wujiang had passed through the vine door and stood next to Meng Qi. The two exchanged a look. When they turned to look, the vine door behind them had closed. Just now, it was detoxification. Meng Qi walked forward. "I don't know what the test is here." As she spoke, she looked at the surroundings. The scenery here was too beautiful. There was a faint fragrance of flowers in the air, and it was very peaceful. She really could not see the test hidden here. Ji Wujiang walked next to her. He looked around and pointed at a small path. "There's a path there." Meng Qi nodded. The small path was not very obvious. It was all paved with stones and was half hidden in the grass. It followed the pool to the back of the tall mountain and the waterfall. The two did not speak and walked towards the small path. As though they felt people coming, when Meng Qi and the others passed by the pool, a few fish jumped out of the pool. Then they happily fell into the pool. "Compared to before, this is a paradise," Meng Qi said. Ji Wujiang's lips curved slightly, showing a slightly mysterious smile. "Do you know the pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion?" he asked lazily. And Meng Qi stilled. She did not understand why the other mentioned Pei Mufeng at this time. Then she instantly reacted. Earlier in the apricot forest, after discovering the poisoned Xiozha, Pei Mufeng had gone to the entrance of the apricot forest to stop Ji Wujiang. But later, he had obviously failed. Because Ji Wujiang had gone straight in, he had almost embarrassed the Medical Cultivation Conference Alliance. What happened to the pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion? Meng Qi did not change her expression and asked lightly. Young and promising, he is indeed a rare genius among sword Xiao. At this age, he has already cultivated a sword spirit. No wonder the Falling Star Pavilion made him the pavilion master. His cultivation is still lacking, but after a few more years of experience, his future will be limitless. What was rare was that Ji Wujiang did not mock Pei Mufeng. Even Meng Qi could not help but turn a look at him. I also heard that this pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion is quite interesting. He is willing to enter the Starfall Sea for 10 years for the Medical Cultivation Conference Alliance, which is rotten to the bone. TSK. Ji Wujiang shook his head. However, I feel that the so-called Alliance for the Medical Cultivators is just an excuse. He entered the Starfall Sea for his own swordsmanship. It was just a convenience, and he even earned the gratitude of the medical cultivators. Compared to his talent in swordsmanship, I admire this more. This fellow is quite ambitious. This is Ji Wujiang's style of speech. Meng Qi thought to himself. This fellow is probably the best among the younger generation of sword Xiao. Few can surpass him. But it's a pity. Ji Wujiang's tone changed. He overestimated himself and tried to stop me. I've just set up 2 random formations. He should still be inside right now, going around in circles. Ha! As he spoke, he laughed proudly. Meng Qi. No wonder he praised Pei Mufeng earlier. It was to boast about himself. The reason why that Pei brat couldn't break those 2 formations so quickly is because, as he spoke, he looked around. Just like this place, it's like a paradise. You won't find any danger in it. Meng Qi suddenly became alert. Ji Wujiang continued. When the surroundings are evil, it is easy for Xiuzhe to stay alert. They will not miss even the tiniest clue. It is much easier to break out of the array. But when the surroundings are comfortable and peaceful, with butterflies flying and fish leaping in the water, it is relaxing, and they will naturally relax. They will miss many details that they should have noticed. He looked at Meng Qi. Right? Meng Qi nodded silently. Ji Wujiang's words were very reasonable on this point. The ancients did not lie when they said they were born in hardship and died in peace and happiness. As she thought, she turned her head to look at the surroundings. This place was still full of flowers and lush green trees. Above the pool, the waterfall fell from the sky. Amidst the splashing of water, crystal-clear water droplets splashed up and sprayed into the surroundings. The surroundings were filled with white mist and looked exceptionally beautiful. There was no danger at all. Then what about here? Meng Qi did not understand and asked, what danger is hidden here? No, Ji Wujiang said straightforwardly, at least not yet. Meng Qi was speechless. So, as expected, he was only using Pei Mufeng to show off how powerful he was? She pursed her lips and strode forward along the path. So what if he is a genius among swordsmen? Ji Wujiang followed and continued. If he meets a powerful array cultivator, he can just casually set up 2 small arrays. So what if his swordsmanship is unparalleled? He can't even touch the corner of my clothes. His voice became much more serious. This is the power of array cultivators. Chapter 81. Meng Qi. Seeing that Ji Wujiang had given her the pill formula, she still asked politely, what kind of formation did you use to deal with the pavilion master of the Falling Star Pavilion? Huh? Ji Wujiang raised his eyebrows and the corners of his lips raised slightly, revealing a very faint smile. He was walking on the right side, so Meng Qi turned around and glanced at him, only to see his unscathed left cheek. A little smile appeared on his handsome face without any scars, and even the gloominess in his eyes seemed to have dissipated a lot. Meng Qi quickly retracted her gaze and heard Ji Wujiang say, that kid from the Falling Star Pavilion is serious, persistent, and can be considered strong. I casually opened 2 small formations and summoned a few girls to surround him, and he couldn't move at all. He paused and said, the small formation is called the Red Sleeves Kill. But when you least expect it, she'll give you a fatal blow. Meng Qi's heart tightened, and she asked subconsciously, and then? Don't worry. Ji Wujiang seemed to have guessed her thoughts, glanced at her lightly, and said unhurriedly, that kid's sword has already been cultivated into a sword spirit. Although it's still very weak, it still has the power to protect himself. He's intoxicated by the girls, and as long as he's not drunk and can still maintain a little clarity, he won't die. Meng Qi was relieved and snorted softly. After getting along with Ji Wujiang for the past few days, she more or less understood his habit of speaking. She knew that he couldn't kill Pei Mufeng, so he played it down as if he was deliberately showing mercy. That's because the pavilion master of the Falling Star Pavilion is a gentleman, she said lightly. After getting along with Ji Wujiang for the past 2 days, she was no longer as afraid of him as she was at the beginning. Anyway, at the very least, he would have to wait until they left this barrier before dealing with her. Ji Wujiang was very knowledgeable. Although he liked to be sarcastic, his stories were very pleasant to listen to. It was much more interesting than the talkative fox's stories about the big bosses of the demon realm. Ji Wujiang sneered. I don't know if he's a gentleman or not, but compared to some hypocritical old fellows who fish for fame, he's still a human. The trichiliocosm is already messy and smelly enough. A few more people like this who are not considered smelly can be treated as purifying the air. He paused and continued. Do you want to learn the red sleeve kill? I don't want to. Meng Qi refused without hesitation. As they talked, they walked up the path by the pool, bypassed the waterfall, and reached the other side of the mountain. The majestic sound of the waterfall could be heard from the other side of the mountain. It was not as earth-shattering as before. That paradise just now really didn't seem to be dangerous at all. It was just a place for them to rest. Meng Qi stood on the hillside and looked into the distance. At the bottom of the hill was a small town. The town was not big. It was only slightly bigger than Fresh Breeze Town, where Meng Qi used to live. Looking down from above, the whole town was in sight. There were a total of 8 main streets in the town. They looked very distinct. Buildings of high and low were arranged in rows on both sides of the streets. From where Meng Qi and the others were, they could even see small people coming and going on the streets. Meng Qi turned and looked at Ji Wujiang. This barrier formation, Ji Wujiang quickly turned his gaze back to the town. It's quite powerful, even he murmured. Meng Qi nodded. Formations could actually summon living creatures, such as the beasts and insects in the 4 extreme formations. For example, the ghostly shadows and goshawks summoned by the 100 ghosts and 100 demons formations and the 1,000 crane formations. However, it was hard to imagine that such a lifelike place, which looked like an ordinary town in the trichiliocosm, existed in a barrier that had lasted for tens of thousands of years. Let's go down. She hesitated for a moment, then walked down the hill. The path led all the way to the small town. They were not far from the small town. It did not take long for them to reach the outskirts of the town. Although the small town was not big, it had everything. There were city walls and city gates. Meng Qi and Ji Wujiang walked closer and looked up at the city walls. There were even soldiers in charge of guarding the city walls. However, their cultivation levels were not high. Even Meng Qi could see that these soldiers were only in the 2nd or 3rd realm of the Foundation Establishment realm. Huh? She was stunned and probed her body with her divine sense. After she woke up from her coma, she did not observe her spiritual sea. Now that she looked, she had unknowingly entered the 7th realm of the Foundation Establishment realm. If she cultivated hard for a while, she would be able to pass through the formation and officially form her gold core. Ji Wujiang glanced at her and said casually, "Cultivation level is important, but it's not very useful if it's just a realm." Meng Qi was too lazy to pay attention to him. She knew that he was going to talk about the benefits of formations again. Of course, she knew how powerful formations were. The person she admired and respected the most was an expert in this field. However, that did not mean that she had to admit that Ji Wujiang was very powerful. It also did not mean that she wanted to learn formations from him. Meng Qi walked quickly to the city gate of the small town. A middle-aged man greeted her with a smile. "Are the 2 of you guests from the other side of the mountain? I'm the mayor of this town. Please follow me." As the mayor spoke, he waved his hand and gestured for Meng Qi and Ji Wujiang to follow. Meng Qi stared at the mayor for a moment. The other party's body looked quite strong. She could not see through his realm. Ji Wujiang said silently, "7th realm of the Golden Core realm." After he said that, he looked at Meng Qi again. It seemed that this was the 2nd test. The 2 of them followed the mayor and walked along the flat streets paved with blue stones towards the center of the town. On both sides of the streets, the various shops did not look much different from the trichiliocosm. Even the buildings looked like ordinary towns in the trichiliocosm. The sounds of hawking, bargaining, and occasionally the aroma of wine and food wafted out. There were many people coming and going on the streets. Most of them would smile and greet the mayor when they saw the 2 of them. More than half of these people were ordinary people. Occasionally, there would be a few shouja who were in the Lianqi stage. At most, they were about the same as the soldiers on the city wall in the 2nd or 3rd realm of Zhuji. However, the entire town, or at least the places that Meng Qi and Ji Wujiang had walked through, were so real that they could not find any fault in every detail. Soon, the mayor led the two of them to the building that looked the best in the center of the town. "This is the best inn in the town. Please." The mayor stopped with a smile and waved his hand towards the entrance of the inn. The inn was about the same as Wishing Lane. There were many guests eating and drinking in the lobby outside. Meng-Chi followed the mayor to the backyard. She carefully observed the guests. There were more Xiozha than on the streets. Meng-Chi could not see the cultivation of more than half of them. "There are many Jindan Xiozha here, and one Yuanying third realm." Ji Wujiang glanced at them, his face full of disdain. "Just so." As he spoke, the Xiozha drinking looked at the two of them. Some had smiles on their faces and looked exceptionally hospitable. They raised the cups in their hands towards Meng-Chi and Ji Wujiang. Meng-Chi returned a smile. "Please take a rest here." The mayor stood outside an independent courtyard and said to them with a smile, "Please." Finishing, he turned and prepared to leave. "Hey!" Ji Wujiang called him without politeness. "You seem to have not said what you need us to do." "What?" The mayor turned his head in puzzlement. "You came from so far away, from the other side of the mountain to help. You don't know what you need to do." He stilled, his thick black brow furrowing as he murmured, "I had thought that you had received orders and came to help." "Did you not?" Ji Wujiang said coldly. "If you don't say it clearly, how will we know how to help you?" Hearing this, the mayor's brow furrowed even tighter, his face full of worry. "I had thought that since you were sent by that Darren to help, you would be enough to help our Wind Rain town pass through this crisis. It seems—" He shook his head as he spoke. Ji Wujiang's gaze was deep and flashed slightly. All of his patience was about to be exhausted on Meng-Chi along the way. He was full of anger right now. Seeing the mayor like this, Ji Wujiang slowly raised his right hand and looked coldly at the mayor. Clearly, if the other said something that made him unhappy, he would slap down. Meng-Chi hurriedly said, "Excuse me, what is going to happen here?" The mayor sighed and said, "You may not know, but there is a tall mountain 500 li away from our Wind Rain town. There is a sect on the mountain. The disciples of the sect are all spell cultivators, but they are all very good at using poison and can control poisonous insects and snakes. Originally, the Wind Rain town paid tribute to them every month in exchange for a month of peace. But 7 days ago, the son of their sect leader came down the mountain to play in our Wind Rain town. Because of some dispute, he was taught a lesson by two Xiozha who couldn't stand it and died here. Meng-Chi roughly understood. So that sect wants to avenge their sect leader's son. Yes. The mayor's eyes were red as he said dejectedly, "The sect leader of their sect is a powerful figure in the second realm of the spirit's severing stage. There are also 12 Yuanying stage elders and dozens of Jindan stage disciples in the sect." The mayor paused and said, "The sect leader of the Soaring Serpent sect sent a message 7 days ago, saying that he would bring his disciples to slaughter the town tonight. I had no choice but to send out a message for help. When I saw you two today, I thought you had specially come to lend a hand and save the lives of the people of our town. It's just a few Yuanying stage Xiozha, and you're so scared?" Ji Wujiang snorted coldly, his face full of disdain. "We did come to help." "Really?" The mayor's face lit up with joy, and he looked gratefully at Ji Wujiang. "I didn't dare to tell this to the people of the town. I was afraid that everyone would panic first. I only gathered all the Xiozha in the town and vowed to protect our hometown tonight. With your help, I can rest assured." Zaya shooting gap. Calming, Chi silently organized the words of the mayor of Wind Rain Town. It seemed that the test this time was to protect this town from the attack of the Soaring Serpent sect. The Soaring Serpent sect was a spell cultivator sect. They were good at using poison and could control poisonous insects. The mayor said that he was worried about the Xiozha of the town. Just now, Ji Wujiang had also said that he saw Yuanying and Jindan Xiozha in the lobby. Then Meng-Chi and the others, as medical Xiozha, should be responsible for ensuring that the Xiozha gathered by the mayor could fight normally. So the test this time was clearly much more difficult than the first one. Right now, there was only her and Ji Wujiang, these two Xiozha. Ji Wujiang was a formation Xiuzha, and she was a Zhuji Xiuzha. Meng Qi pursed her lips. Let's take it one step at a time. The Ling medicines they brought could not be used. They could only use the Dan medicines that had already been made. It was clearly not enough to rely on those Dan medicines. Meng Qi was about to ask when the mayor took out 2 tokens and respectfully presented them to Meng Qi and the others with both hands. This is the token of our town's peers. This concerns everyone's life and death. You too can use this token to take whatever you need from any store in the town. He paused as though he was reminding Meng Qi and the others. He slowly said, but these things can only be used here. Meng Qi took the token and nodded. There are still 12 hours until midnight. I need to gather the Xiuzha to discuss how to deploy the defenses for tonight. The mayor then said, 2 hours in advance, all the stores in the town will be closed. I will also order the normal residents to hide. Please hurry. All right. Meng Qi nodded. Many thanks. She briskly handed a token to Ji Wujiang and turned to walk out of the inn. The streets on the 2 sides of the inn were still very busy at this time. These normal residents probably did not know what would happen next as they laughed as they passed through the streets. Meng Qi quickly calculated what she needed to prepare. She definitely needed to prepare a lot of herbs that could cure poisons. Also, she could make some insect repellent powder. Since the other was called Soaring Snake Sect, they would probably have many poisonous snakes other than poisonous insects. Then she also needed to buy some medicine that could restrain snake venom or disperse snakes. Also, if there were spell cultivators, she needed to prepare some herbs that could treat internal and external injuries as well as injuries caused by special spells. Also, her lack of spirit energy was a big problem. She did not have many Dark North pills that she could make herself, so she needed to buy some Dark North pills. But even so, Meng Qi stood outside a medicinal herb shop and scanned the entire town. When she was on the mountain just now, she felt that it was not very big. Now that she was in it, it was really impossible for her to take care of the entire town with her cultivation and ability. Originally, hundreds of medical Xiuzha would enter the barrier of the competition. Then this town would have more than 100 or even more Jinan and nascent soul stage medical Xiuzha helping. They should be able to take care of it. Now there were only 2 people. Meng Qi turned to look at Ji Wujiao. The black-robed man stood beside her with a cold and mocking smile on his lips. His gaze was gloomy, and there was no compassion in his dark blue eyes. Meng Qi. He really looked very unreliable. You can't think of a good way? Ji Wujiang raised his eyebrows. He was taller than Meng Qi. At this time, he was still standing on the steps of the door of the inn and looked at her with a condescending gaze. I have an idea, he said slowly. Then he deliberately paused. Clearly, he had other conditions to follow. Meng Qi's gaze flashed slightly, and a crazy idea suddenly flashed through her mind. She looked at Ji Wujiang's face, which was full of "Come and beg me. Beg me, and I will tell you." Just now, the mayor said, Meng Qi said, "It is fine as long as we can protect this wind-rain town." Yes. Ji Wujiang stilled, and then nodded. I am a medical Xiuzha, and the people who would have come here were also medical Xiuzha. Meng Qi said, if there are enough medical Xiuzha and a large number of Yuanying and Jinan Xiuzha, then it should not be a problem to protect this place. Ji Wujiang's gaze suddenly became slightly strange. He looked at Meng Qi just like that. His blue eyes turned, and his slightly raised lips, which had a hint of smugness, were slowly suppressed. With just the 2 of us, even if we have 3 heads and 6 arms, we cannot guarantee the treatment of all the Xiuzha in the city, Meng Qi said. Once a gap appears somewhere, the Soaring Snake Sect will attack. If the rescue is not timely, it may cause the innocent residents to die. The Xiuzha responsible for protecting the town may even be injured or killed. So shouldn't we ask what it means to protect the town? Ji Wujiang said lazily. Maybe the mayor will not die, or maybe he wants to protect an important place. He looked at Meng Qi and spoke his thoughts. This way, we can give up on guarding other places and focus our efforts on protecting this important place or person. If it's just a certain person or a certain location, we can definitely set up a formation around it. I guess this test can't be endless. Since it starts at midnight, then we should be able to drag it out until daytime or after 24 hours. Meng Qi stilled, clearly not expecting Ji Wujiang to say this. Then what about the soldiers on the city gate and the residents of the town? She asked, are we just going to ignore them? Just now, the mayor said that the Soaring Snake sect is going to slaughter the entire town. Meng Qi. Ji Wujiang's tone was indifferent. This is the boundary of your medical Xiozha, holy land. The residents here, including the mayor, are probably not real people. Why do you care so much? They won't feel pain even if they die. No, Meng Qi said decisively. I object. Ji Wujiang sneered. Inexplicable benevolence will only bring more tragic consequences. Meng Qi glared at him and said, you said it yourself. This is the boundary of the medical Xiozha, holy land. Let me tell you. She paused, looked into Ji Wujiang's eyes, and said, since the ancient great powers from tens of thousands of years ago, even if the inheritance has been cut off, even if no one can reproduce the glory of the great powers now, the test from the medical Xiozha, holy land, will never sacrifice the lives of others, and it is even more impossible to leave them in the lurch. It is an optional way to pass the test. Meng Qi paused again, and then said slowly, I will never do such a thing, no matter when or where. Ji Wujiang sneered and crossed his arms in front of his chest. Since you have compassion and don't want to sacrifice them, what are you going to do? Meng Qi took a deep breath, and her eyes were extremely bright. Since there are still 12 hours, we can go and find enough materials to set up the formation on the path that the Soaring Snake sect must pass before they come here. When she spoke, there was a hint of killing intent in her voice, which diluted the original sweetness of a young girl. The green-robed girl stood tall in front of Ji Wujiang. The wind blew her hair, and there was a hint of decisiveness and courage on her elegant little face. It will directly intercept them halfway, Meng Qi said. Chapter 82. Ji Wujiang looked deeply at Meng Qi, a hint of surprise flashing through his eyes. He had never thought that this sister would be so daring when she went crazy. Have you thought it through? He slowly asked. With just the two of us? No, Meng Qi quickly said. She had thought about it before. There are other Xiozha in the town. Since the mayor said he could gather them to defend Wind and Rain Town, then they can come with us. Then they can come with us and ambush the enemies of the Soaring Snake sect. Ji Wujiang examined Meng Qi for a moment. To be honest, he was a little surprised. But more than that, it was a shock that he had not felt for a long time. Other than not being cruel and heartless enough, Meng Qi's talent in formations, and the decisiveness she showed at this time. Even before, she had stubbornly refused to admit defeat, and insisted on him lowering his head first. Also, she had dared to use the 1,000 crane formation to steal the medicinal herbs of his ghosts and shadows. She had unhesitatingly used the blood moon and the courage to fight him head-on. Every aspect of the situation suited his temperament too well. Ji Wujiang slowly narrowed his eyes and stared at Meng Qi for a moment. The blue-clothed youth stood in front of him. Under the sunlight, Meng Qi's skin was white, her nose was tall, and her gaze was clear and deep. Ji Wujiang slowly exhaled. He had decided, no matter what, he would have Meng Qi enter his sect. It was not easy to find an heir for his sect. The great majority of Xiozha in the 3,000 worlds pursued Sword Xiao, Spell Xiao, and were unfamiliar with formations. They had never considered switching to Formation Xiao. As to the artifact Xiao that knew formations, just as he had said before, most of them were muddle-headed. Other than forging, they had no ambitions. Occasionally, there would be a few with ambition, but their talent was lacking. Ji Wujiang had visited several of the top artifact Xiao sections. In these years, he had encountered many Xiozha, but there were not many that satisfied him. His gaze slowly swept across Meng Qi, and he was very satisfied. All right. Meng Qi, who had been waiting for Ji Wujiang's usual sarcasm, did not expect such a decisive response. We can give it a try. Ji Wujiang's lips curled up, his eyes filled with bloodthirsty excitement. Let's kill them on the way. Heh. He laughed coldly. Meng Qi, it seems that I have underestimated you in the past. I didn't expect you to have such a temperament. Meng Qi turned around and walked quickly to the grocery store on the other side. What else? I thought that medical cultivators were all the same, sanctimonious and hypocritical. Ji Wujiang caught up with him and said lazily, on the one hand, they're doing selfish things, even causing countless people to be plunged into misery and suffering. On the other hand, they claim to be magnanimous and compassionate, and that they would never take the initiative to kill others. Oh, of course, it's also because they are quite self-aware. They know that even if they want to kill, they're too weak to kill that many people. Meng Qi was stunned. She could see that Ji Wujiang did not like people from the medical cultivators spell union. She did not expect him to have such a deep misunderstanding of medical cultivators. She pursed her lips and walked forward along the street as she said, "The person you injured earlier was Li Che from the Surging Waves Academy." "Who is that?" Ji Wujiang said matter-of-factly. "Meng Qi. A young male cultivator who looks quite weak," she said. "I know." Ji Wujiang's face suddenly darkened. That young male medical cultivator who was risked to be released by Lu Qingran. In the apricot forest, he even dared to overestimate himself and block her way. Meng Qi turned to glance at him and said lightly, "The Surging Waves Academy is not a large sect. Medical cultivators in the Southern Land are weak, and magic cultivators are powerful. But they have been doing their best to do what a medical cultivator should do." Ha! Ji Wujiang obviously did not believe her. Every year when the epidemic runs rampant, the Surging Waves Academy will always send disciples to various cities and towns in the Southern Land to treat ordinary people there in order to prevent the epidemic from breaking out. Meng Qi said lightly, "Of course, this is also the cultivation of medical cultivators, but to treat ordinary people," she smiled. "To medical cultivators with third-grade medical skills and above, the effect is very small. I know that there are more than one medical cultivator sects that do this," Meng Qi said again. "Maybe you will mock them for fishing for fame, but I know that is not the case." She emphasized again, "I know that they are not, but as medical cultivators, they can't just stand by and watch people die." A complicated light flashed through Ji Wujiang's eyes. He remembered that in the previous test, he was caught off guard and poisoned by the Seven Objects powder. Meng Qi's first reaction was not to take the opportunity to kill him. Ji Wujiang would not be mistaken about the flickering light and gestures on her fingertips. She really did subconsciously want to save his life first. "Why are you telling me this?" Ji Wujiang's expression did not change. "Nothing," Meng Qi said, "to find something to talk about so that it won't be boring." She wouldn't try to convince others with words to change their minds. But she would still say what she should say. "You think that I shouldn't have hurt Li Che? You are criticizing me?" Ji Wujiang was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, "Meng Qi." She snorted softly, too lazy to pay attention to Ji Wujiang. This guy always had the ability to twist everything. "The poison I gave them was very weak. It was just residual shadow grass and cold plum flower juice. Any third-grade medical cultivator could have cured it. If they couldn't even cure that poison, why would they force themselves to stay in the medical cultivation world?" Ji Wujiang said again. "What about the 4 seasons, 4 commands formation?" Meng Qi asked in return. Ji Wujiang sneered. "I have to let them know that there is always someone better than them. I am also giving them a wake-up call. The entire medical cultivation world is very weak in the trichiliocosm. How arrogant they are!" Meng Qi had already turned into a grocery store. She handed the token to the owner and bought all the materials she needed. She did not want to argue with Ji Wujiang about medical cultivation anymore. It was meaningless. Ji Wujiang asked, "What formation do you want to set up?" "The 100 Ghosts and Charm formation is fine," Meng Qi said. "The 1,000 Crane formation is also very useful." Ji Wujiang. Was she going to use everything she learned now? What Meng Qi wanted to set up the most was a variation of the 4 Extremes formation. However, she glanced at Ji Wujiang and remembered that when she set up the four extremes formation last time, Sikong Xing and the others were extremely shocked. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, she decided to forget it. Apart from that, I also need a few formations that can control their movements. And she thought for a moment. A killing formation? What do you think? When it came to formations, Ji Wujiang was a real expert. When Meng Qi said this, he instantly had several ideas in his mind. However, he did not say anything. Instead, he looked at Meng Qi and waited for her to speak. Meng Qi was also thinking. There are two types of spirit array formation techniques. Ji Wujiang was not stingy with her at all and directly explained. Using one's own spiritual energy to draw a formation, it can be activated immediately, and its explosive power is extremely shocking. This is the most commonly used and the most important way of fighting for formation cultivators. There is another way. Ji Wujiang watched Meng Qi classify a large number of materials and put them into the storage bag. He glanced at the grocery store owner who was smiling all the time and continued, "It is to use materials instead of spiritual energy to draw a formation. The advantage is that you can set up a formation in advance and activate its power when needed. The disadvantage is that if you are facing an enemy, it will take a long time to set up the formation." Meng Qi nodded. She had not studied formations systematically before. After she exchanged for the book that introduced formations in the Heaven and Earth Book House a while ago, she studied it carefully. The book also mentioned these two methods. It was just that it was not as concise as Ji Wujiang. The person who taught Meng Qi formations in the past was open-minded and unrestrained by nature and was unparalleled in power. He was quite unscrupulous in his actions and often surprised people. He taught Meng Qi the four extreme formations, the Great Star Formation. These were important formations that should not have been taught to outsiders. He did not have the slightest intention of hiding anything from her. However, he had never explained the basics of formations. When Meng Qi used formations before, sometimes she was also ignorant. She used whatever that person taught her. It was only after reading that book that she slowly figured out some tricks. Ji Wujiang glanced at Meng Qi and said, "The Soaring Serpent sect has spirit-severing cultivators and so many nascent soul cultivators. These materials are obviously not enough." Meng Qi nodded. The two of them turned around and went out. They simply ran around the entire Windy Wind town. All the materials that could be used in the grocery store were swept clean by them. In the end, Meng Qi even went to the pharmacy and used her token to take out a lot of medicinal herbs that could be used. "How is it?" Ji Wujiang asked. "Do you have an idea? How do we set up the formation?" It took them almost an hour to collect the materials for the formation. The two of them did not go to find the mayor first. Instead, they returned to the inn in the center of Windy Wind Town and the room that the mayor had prepared for them. Meng Qi took out a piece of paper and said, "It's probably not easy to kill a spirit-severing cultivator with a killing formation." "Yes." Ji Wujiang nodded. He opened his mouth to say something, but in the end he did not say anything. Meng Qi narrowed her eyes slightly. She knew that time was precious. She quickly went through the array formations she knew in her mind. She decided not to use the four extreme formations for now. The formations that were mainly used for killing and could injure spirit-severing cultivators. Meng Qi could not make up her mind for a moment. She looked up at Ji Wujiang, who was sitting opposite her. The other party was looking at her coldly. It seemed that he had no intention of reminding her. What should she choose? That book. Meng Qi was hesitating when the man's voice suddenly sounded in her mind again. However, this time, the other party's voice sounded a little weak. Meng Qi quickly glanced at Ji Wujiang. The other party's expression did not change. It was obvious that he could not hear this voice. She did not dare to speak and could only ask silently in her mind, "Is it the book in the Heaven and Earth Book House?" But the formations on it are very simple. Based on Meng Qi's current experience in learning formations, it seemed that formations were not like medicinal pills and spells that had clear grades. Powerful formations were very complicated and could not be used by cultivators with very low cultivation. Of course, their power was also stronger. Therefore, although Meng Qi knew the four extreme formations, even if she used materials and did not use spirit qi to set up the formations, she could not set up the original formations of the four extreme formations. She could only use the modified formations that her master had specially simplified for her. If she wanted to use it at the last minute against an enemy, with Meng Qi's current cultivation, she might not even be able to draw 1/10 of the original formations of the four extreme formations. Last time in Hua Jiang Manor, she had also used materials to set up the modified formations of the four extreme formations. Therefore, low-level Xiuzhe were unable to use complex and powerful formations. This was probably one of the ways to distinguish the grades of formations. The voice sounded lazy and slightly hoarse. It seemed that he was really lacking in energy. That book has a special introduction to killing formations. He paused and said, "Formations have no grades. So what if you're a spirit-severing cultivator? Don't be afraid." "Yes," Meng Qi silently replied in her heart. She could not take that book out of the Heaven and Earth book house, but after leaving the heavens beyond heaven, she quickly used other bamboo slips to record the contents of the book. At this moment, according to the man's instructions, Meng Qi took out the bamboo slips from her storage bag, held them in her hand, and injected spirit qi into them. She quickly read them. Ji Wujiong. Was she really sharpening her spear at the last minute? This was like standing outside the examination hall and studying on the spot before an exam. However, the more Meng Qi showed her super talent in formations, the more his heart itched. He wanted to take her in as a disciple. He really wanted to take her in. Meng Qi quickly saw the location that the man mentioned. She glanced through the contents of the book and asked in her heart, "Is it the sun-slashing formation?" The name of this formation sounded quite majestic, but it was actually a very simple formation. Meng Qi glanced at it. She reckoned that even Qi refinement cultivators could use it. There's also falling star, chasing moon. Cough, cough. The man's voice was still lazy. In the end, he even coughed twice. "Ranwen, are you okay?" Meng Qi immediately became nervous. "I'm fine." The man coughed twice again. "You." Meng Qi was instantly extremely worried. In her heart, her master was almost omnipotent and extremely powerful. How could he be so weak? Was he injured? Was there someone more powerful than him? "Are you okay?" She thought about it and could not help but ask in her heart. "Ah." The man chuckled. His voice sounded quite pleasant. "I'm fine." He paused and said again, "I'm fine. Don't worry." The sun-slashing formation, falling star formation, and chasing moon formation are the most basic killing formations. They're simple, but very practical. They're not very useful when facing one enemy. However, when facing more enemies, the smaller the formation, the more miraculous the effect. The man asked, "Can you understand?" There was a hint of testing in his words. Meng Qi quickly thought about it and came to a realization. We have limited time. If it's a large formation, we can only set up a few at most. The other party has spirit-severing stage and nascent soul stage cultivators. Once one of them activates the formation, if the reaction is too fast, we might not be able to trap everyone in the formation. "Yes." The man chuckled again. Although he coughed occasionally, his voice did not sound as powerful as when he appeared the day before. However, he seemed to be in a good mood. His tone was leisurely and unhurried. Meng Qi's heart warmed slightly. This way of getting along was really similar to the warm feeling of the two of them in her previous life, one teaching and the other learning. "I understand," Meng Qi replied softly. "Then go and do it," the man said. "You can do it." "Okay." She suddenly felt a sense of pride. This "you can do it" was far better than a million words of encouragement. After the man said that, he did not say anything else. Meng Qi was already used to it. She did not know why the other party would pay attention to her and always appear by her side when she needed it the most. And it seemed to be getting more and more frequent. Did this mean that they would be able to meet again soon? When Meng Qi thought of this, she became even more confident. Ji Wujiong sat across from her. He could not hear Meng Qi's voice, but he was not blind yet. This girl's cheeks were bright red from reading a formation scroll. She was beaming with joy and could not hide the joy in her eyes. Those who did not know better would think that she was reading a love letter from her lover. What are you happy about? Killing formations. Meng Qi coughed softly and changed the topic. I thought of what killing formations to use. Lying to my face, Ji Wujiang said coldly. Meng Qi raised her eyebrows. She was in a good mood. Ji Wujiang's faint sarcasm could not affect her at all. Humph. The other party snorted again. He watched as Meng Qi took out a piece of paper and quickly drew 3 different formations on it. Oh! Ji Wujiang's eyes flashed slightly. Cutting sun, chasing moon, falling star, are you sure? You want to use these 3 formations? Yes. Meng Qi nodded affirmatively. Why? Ji Wujiang asked. You should know that although these 3 formations are killing formations, they are the simplest killing formations. Even cultivators who have perfected qi refinement can use them. We have limited time and manpower, Meng Qi said as she stood up and walked out of the inn. Let's talk as we walk. Let's go find the mayor. And then? Ji Wujiang followed and asked. Meng Qi walked very quickly. There is a limit to the time we have to set up formations. If we set up large formations, then we might only be able to set up 3 or 4 of them. The other party has spirit-severing and nascent soul cultivators. What if they react quickly and do not enter the formation? So you want to use small formations? Ji Wujiang asked. Although he was asking, there was already a faint smile in his eyes. As soon as Meng Qi said the names of the 3 formations, he instantly guessed her intentions. However, he still had to ask clearly and see if she had accidentally stumbled upon them. Yes, Meng Qi nodded. Her left hand was still in the air as she practiced drawing the 3 formations she had just learned. With a glance, Ji Wujiang knew what Meng Qi was doing. He was a bit speechless and a bit amused. She really had flipped through books and was applying what she had learned on the spot. There was no delay at all. Ji Wujiang slowly exhaled. Even if he had to rob, kidnap, threaten, or bribe this disciple, he was definitely going to take her in. If it's just a formation like chasing sun, we can set up hundreds of them. Meng Qi continued. Also, she had other ideas. With such a basic formation, even if we accidentally fall into the formation and activate it, the disciples of Soaring Snake's sect probably won't care too much. We can also use these 3 small formations to lure them into the center. Then, we can set up other formations around them. Even if we can't hurt the sect master of Soaring Snake's sect, we can still hurt many Golden Core and Nascent Soul disciples. Meng Qi. Ji Wujiang suddenly stopped in his tracks, and his voice suddenly became serious. What is it? Meng Qi also stopped in her tracks and looked at Ji Wujiang in confusion. Do you know that there's a reason why the chopping sun, chasing moon, and falling star formations are named after the sun, moon, and stars? Meng Qi was stunned and asked, what's the reason? Although these 3 formations are low-level formations, they're the foundation of many great killing formations. Ji Wujiang said, you should know that many formations can be stacked on top of each other. When their power is maximized, they'll also have many wonderful uses. Ji Wujiang had seen Meng Qi do this with his own eyes, so he knew that she definitely understood. Yes, Meng Qi nodded. So, Ji Wujiang said, when we're setting up the formations, we can set up these 3 formations according to certain laws and maximize their power. In addition, the killing formations can also be stacked with the poison formations. I just saw you go to the pharmacy and ask for those poisonous spiritual herbs and flowers. I'm sure you have similar ideas. He paused for a moment and said, for example, the chopping sun formation. After it's activated, 3 long sabers will slash at the sun into formation from 3 directions. If the poison formations are stacked, the sabers can be dipped in poison. Ji Wujiang glanced at Meng Qi and continued. The falling star formation is made of iron caltrops that look like meteorites falling from the sky. Similarly, it can be dipped in poison. Meng Qi felt relaxed and happy when she heard this. Of course, she knew that these formations could be stacked on top of each other. She had used them in the past. However, drawing two formations and putting them together wouldn't make them stacked. As Ji Wujiong said, they would become even stronger. Ji Wujiong looked into Meng Qi's eyes and said slowly, "If you acknowledge me as your master, I'll teach you everything I've learned in my life." Meng Qi. Didn't he want to cut her into pieces to leave this place? Moreover, how could she acknowledge someone else as her master? Meng Qi was about to refuse when the man's voice suddenly sounded again. His tone was clearly pleasant just now. He spoke gently to her and made her feel like she was bathed in the spring breeze. At this moment, even his voice became bone-chilling. "You're overestimating yourself." The man coughed in a low voice. "It's just stacking formations. You actually have the nerve to use it to make someone acknowledge you as her master." Meng Qi. Meng Qi. Yes. Go back to your room at the inn. Let him wait for you for a moment. No. The man hesitated for a moment and said, 5 minutes. I'll teach you how to stack formations. It's just a small trick. With your intelligence, you'll be able to master it in a moment. Meng Qi. Okay. How is it? Ji Wujiong was still looking at her. His gaze was heavy, and he couldn't hide the trace of expectation in it. Thank you for your appreciation, fellow Taoist Ji, but I already have a master. Meng Qi paused and said, even if he doesn't want to acknowledge me as his disciple, even if I can't get his permission to become his disciple in my entire life. However, I will never acknowledge someone else as my master. After she finished speaking, she saluted Ji Wujiong. Please wait for me for 5 minutes. I still have some questions to figure out. After Meng Qi finished speaking, she didn't wait for Ji Wujiong to speak. She turned around and hurried back to the inn. She returned to her room like a gust of wind and quickly closed the door. Then, she took a deep breath and said to that person in her mind, I've returned to the inn. This time, the man's voice didn't sound for a long time. Excuse me? Are you still there? Meng Qi waited for a moment and asked cautiously again. Yes. The man's voice seemed to be colder than before. He responded faintly, and when he spoke again, his tone seemed a little indifferent. Sit cross-legged on the bed and relax your whole body. Yes. Meng Qi responded without hesitation. She sat cross-legged on the bed and relaxed her whole body. The jade slip of the outland. The man said again, hold it in your hand and separate a trace of your divine sense into it. Yes. Meng Qi's heart suddenly thumped rapidly. For a moment, she even felt a little thirsty, and her mind became blank. She vaguely felt that she was about to discover some truths. However, she didn't dare to expect too much. She was worried that there would be an even greater disappointment waiting for her. Her palms were slightly sweaty, and even the jade slip of the outland was soaked in sweat, becoming more and more moist. Meng Qi took a deep breath and closed her eyes as she was told. She separated a trace of her divine sense and probed into the jade slip. Her vision suddenly turned black, as if she had fallen from a very high place. While the world was spinning, her feet suddenly stepped on flat ground, and her body also stabilized. Meng Qi took a deep breath and looked around with her eyes wide open. The cloud waterfall fell from the high mountain and poured into the deep pool at the bottom of the mountain with great momentum. The deep pool was filled with clouds and mist. At this time, the sky just happened to shine down, and a curved rainbow slanted across the cloud waterfall. The scene in front of her was so beautiful that it was unreal. This was Meng Qi. Behind her, a man's clear voice came. Meng Qi suddenly turned around. About 10 meters behind her, a man in a white robe stood tall. His long hair was as black as ink, and it was tied up by a small white jade crown. His eyes were bright like stars, his eyebrows were high, his nose was straight, and his thin lips were as if they were carved by a knife. He was delicate and perfect. The man stood quietly in the same place. His expression was indifferent, but there was a touch of unrestrained and carefree between his eyebrows. Meng Qi slowly blinked, but her eyes were hot and swollen. Even if the stars changed, the sun rose, and the moon sank. Even if she died 1,000 times, she would never mistake him for someone else. She was about to call him master. Meng-Chi had just opened her mouth, but before she could make a sound, the man in white robe looked at her. The white-robed man glanced at her indifferently. His voice was as cold as his gaze. I know your intentions. He paused and said, I'll teach you the array. You don't have to worship me as your master, and you don't have to be embarrassed. Meng-Chi, I'm not embarrassed. Not at all. Chapter 83. The white-robed man couldn't see through Meng-Chi's thoughts. He glanced at her indifferently, waved his sleeves slightly, and walked forward. His expression was still indifferent, but he didn't walk fast. Meng-Chi lowered her head slightly as she followed behind him. She watched as the hem of his white robe fluttered. His robe swayed gently as if it was a cat's paw that was gently scratching her in appreciation. It was itchy, and she was overwhelmed with ecstasy. Her heart beat faster and faster, but her throat was empty. It was dry and astringent. Even if she opened her mouth repeatedly, she couldn't make a sound. She felt as if time had stopped, but it also seemed to pass very quickly. The white-robed man didn't walk for long before he stopped and turned to look at her. The three formations of chopping sun, chasing moon, and falling star are often called the three talents small killing formation when combined. Yes, Meng-Chi answered blankly. She heard him talking, but his voice sounded distant, as if it came from far away. Even if she understood every word, she didn't know what they meant when they were connected. It was as if she didn't understand at all. She looked at his familiar, yet somewhat unfamiliar face. They hadn't seen each other for many years. In her previous life, there were always a few months where they saw each other day and night. Logically speaking, she should have already gotten used to his magnificent beauty. However, when she saw him now, she was still a little dazed by his handsome face. She was wrong. She was really wrong. Even if Ji Wujiang healed the wounds on his face, he would still be far inferior to a strand of hair on this person in front of her. Meng-Chi believed that among the billions of creatures in the three realms, no one would be more good-looking than him, especially since he had a noble temperament, kind and gentle temperament. He was the best person in the three realms. The white-robed man glanced at her again, stretched out his finger, and pointed diagonally at the ground. Chi, chi, chi. The three formations of chopping sun were not complicated at all. In a flash, the man set up the three formations and said indifferently, the three formations can be used consecutively. Entering one formation can trigger all three formations at the same time. He said, if you want, Meng-Chi. The white-robed man raised his long eyebrows slightly, and his cold gaze fell on Meng-Chi's face. What did I just say? He asked. You just now? Meng-Chi opened his mouth and subconsciously repeated the words, but his mind was blank. She had no idea what the man had just said. After repeating just now a few times, her face was burning, and even her ears felt like they were on fire. Meng-Chi pursed his lips and lowered his head in embarrassment. She had never been so embarrassed in front of this person before. When the other party was teaching, he was so distracted that he didn't even hear what the other party was saying. Meng-Chi blushed and looked at the soft grass on the ground, unable to say anything. She didn't notice that a faint smile flashed through the white-robed man's eyes. However, when he spoke again, his voice was even colder than before. Are you unwilling to learn from me? No. Meng-Chi raised her head abruptly, her face flushed red. Of course I'm willing, she explained, but felt that her words were powerless. She lowered her head and said in a low voice, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have been absent-minded. Please don't take offense. The white-robed man's lips curled up slightly. He had seen Meng-Chi's calm and collected appearance many times. Her blushing and embarrassed appearance was actually a bit cute. However, he quickly put away his smile and said indifferently, I won't repeat it a third time. Yes. Meng-Chi hurriedly responded. She raised her eyes. This time, she didn't dare to stare at the other party's face. She was afraid that if she wasn't careful, her mind would start to wander again. Meng Qi focused on the other party's hand. The white-robed man's hand was slender and strong, clean and beautiful. He pointed to the three formations he had just set up and repeated, "When the three formations are connected, they form the three talents small killing formation. The sun-slashing sword can summon three sun-slashing swords. The moon-slashing sword uses sharp silver threads to lock down the entire formation. The silver threads are difficult to distinguish, and the slightest carelessness can cut and injure the people in the formation. The Falling Star Association has hidden weapons that cover the sky and cover the earth to kill people who fall into the formation." "Yes." Meng Qi nodded and responded obediently. Her expression became focused and serious. She no longer had the shyness and panic that she couldn't hide earlier. The white-robed man was slightly disappointed. His gaze circled around Meng Qi's serious little face before he slowly retracted it. Then, he pointed to the three formations that had already been set up on the ground and asked Meng Qi, "If you want to stack the poison formations, how do you do it?" Meng Qi didn't dare to step forward. She could only stand where she was and carefully observe the three formations. To stack the effects of the formations, it wasn't as simple as drawing them together. The first condition was that the stacked formations had to be able to connect with the existing formations. In other words, there had to be at least two lines in the two formations that could run through the two formations. Meng Qi muttered to herself for a moment. She was slightly far away. At this time, she could only lean slightly and look at the ground. "Come here." The white-robed man waved at her, indicating for her to stand next to him. "Yes." Meng Qi was stunned. She obediently took 2 steps forward. This time, she could see more clearly. The three formations on the ground seemed to have come to life. Although she was distracted just now, Meng Qi still outlined the process of the man drawing the three formations in her mind. Her gaze finally fell on the man's hands. Now that she was closer, Meng Qi could even see the man's neatly trimmed fingernails. There wasn't a single prominent knuckle on his slender fingers. They looked like the most perfect collection in the world. There wasn't a single flaw to be found. Meng Qi suddenly shook her head hard and secretly glanced at the man. She was distracted again. She quickly lowered her head. However, she didn't know that her reddened earlobes had completely betrayed her thoughts. The white-robed man's lips curled up slightly. When he spoke again, his voice had become warmer. "Have you thought of it?" "Yes." Meng Qi nodded. "Come." The man stepped aside. Although the ground was soft soil, Meng Qi still couldn't copy him and draw formations easily with her fingers like a knife. She took out her small medicine knife and pointed diagonally to the ground. The medicine knife quickly drew across the ground. A small formation quickly appeared between the three formations. Meng Qi had already thought about it. She didn't hesitate to act. The newly laid formation had 3 lines running through it, connecting it to the other 3 formations. In addition, the 3 lines crisscrossed and connected to the formation next to them. She drew the last stroke and put away her medicine knife. A smile appeared on her face. "Smoke formation," she said. "Poison can be placed in the center of the formation. It can be activated to attack and defend." As Meng Qi spoke, she subconsciously turned to look at the white-robed man. She forgot that she had taken a few steps forward to lay the formation. At this moment, she was standing beside the man. While she was drawing the smoke formation, the man silently walked to her side. Meng Qi turned around and smelled a cool fragrance. It was slightly bitter, like the fragrance of the trees in the forest after the autumn and winter rain. However, it smelled very good. Meng Qi hurriedly took 2 or 3 steps back and put some distance between the two of them. She was now much calmer than before. Although her heart was still beating very fast, she was full of joy. However, she was no longer in a trance like before. She couldn't think at all. "Brother, I'm sorry for offending you." Meng Qi lowered her eyes and saluted the man. She wanted to call herself a disciple, but then she remembered that the man still hadn't agreed to let her become his disciple. She quickly changed the way she addressed him. The man was like the moon in her heart. Whatever he said was right. Meng Qi had never doubted or been dissatisfied with him. The white-robed man glanced at Meng Qi. His eyelids drooped slightly, hiding the glimmer in his eyes. "Senior, please enlighten me." Meng Qi bowed again. This time, she didn't even dare to look at the other party. She looked at the ground and slowly came back to her senses. This didn't seem to be the floating island of the Outland. The grass on the ground she was stepping on was soft and lush. The cold pond on the side was also very wide. Meng Qi looked at it from the corner of her eyes. She couldn't see the other side of the cold pond at a glance. The cloud waterfall fell from the high mountain. The green mountain towered, connecting with the surrounding mountain peaks. Above the mountain range, the sea of clouds was majestic. It only turned into a cloud waterfall pouring down here. In short, the place where Meng Qi was now was far more magnificent than the cloud waterfall on the floating island of the Outland that she had seen once in a drunken dream. Although the scenery on the floating island of the Outland was extremely beautiful, it wasn't as magnificent as this. Meng Qi's palms that were hanging by her side slowly opened and then slowly clenched. She subconsciously pursed her lips. So this wasn't the Outland? Or this was the Outland, a place that she had never set foot in? Also, she was clearly in the enchantment of the apricot forest, but the man could use the jade slip of the Outland to bring her here. Who was he? Countless thoughts flashed through Meng Qi's mind. However, in the end, she let them extinguish one by one. If he didn't say, she wouldn't ask, think, or doubt. Meng Qi gently closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her gaze became firm and clear again. She would believe whatever he said. These thoughts flashed through her mind quickly, but in fact, it only took a moment. "Don't call me senior," the white-robed man said. "My name is Yun Qingyan. Meng Qi. Since there's no need to be apprenticed, you can call me by my name. 2KXS. La Yun Qingyan." Meng Qi murmured and repeated these two words. She raised her head and looked at the other party in a daze. The white-robed man's black hair was as black as ink, and his expression was indifferent. He stood tall and looked into Meng Qi's eyes. "Yes," Meng Qi responded in a low voice. Yun Qingyan took a step forward and raised his sleeves. A gust of wind blew from below and blew up his robe. "Be careful," he said, clenched his hand into a fist, and gently pushed Meng Qi's back. The wide sleeves of his white robe drooped down and covered his hand. Yun Qingyan protected Meng Qi through his robe and retreated backward. Meng Qi only saw a bright light in front of his eyes. When the two of them set up the formation just now, it was just a drawing. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be able to be activated. However, Yun Qingyan used an unknown method. Meng Qi only saw light and shadow in front of his eyes. A long saber with a cold light jumped out of the air and slashed at the center of the formation. Then, a silvery thread shuttled out of the array. The silvery threads looked very thin and would be overlooked if one didn't pay attention. However, Meng Qi knew that if he accidentally walked through the silvery threads, he would be left with countless wounds by the disorderly silvery threads. Before the silvery threads faded, countless hidden weapons fell from the sky and enveloped the entire formation. Meng Qi slowly exhaled and looked at the fierce attack in front of him. Yun Qingyan flicked his sleeves, and the last formation, the smoke-gathering formation, was activated. Those weapons were instantly stained with a faint green color. Meng Qi didn't put poison in the eye of the formation, and not all poisons were green. She knew that Yun Qingyan just wanted to let her see it clearly. She slowly exhaled and looked at the light of the formation in front of her. This kind of earth-shattering attack was actually formed by 3 small arrays superimposed on a not-so-powerful smoke-gathering array. The study of spirit designs was indeed vast and profound. It was also extremely powerful. Meng Qi subconsciously thought of what Ji Wujiang had said earlier. He said that in ancient times, powerful formation cultivators could fight against many people alone. They could sit in the formation alone and defeat Dharma cultivators and sword cultivators of similar cultivation levels. It seemed that if one really became a great formation cultivator, they could indeed have such power. For example, Meng Qi turned to look at Yun Qingyan. He was sure that Yun Qingyan had the ability to do so. Do you remember the positions of the three formations just now? Yun Qingyan asked again. His voice was clear and cold, as if it had been soaked in the first snow. Meng Qi nodded. Only then did she realize that the two of them were standing side by side again. Yun Qingyan was right beside her. When he flicked his sleeves, his long robe almost brushed against her cheek. Meng Qi hurriedly took 2 steps back respectfully. Although Yun Qingyan didn't allow her to become his disciple, in her heart, he was already her only master. He was a powerhouse that she would respect for the rest of her life. He was also the person who treated her the best and the most gentle in her life. I remember, Meng Qi said. She couldn't wait to take out her notebook and memorize everything Yun Qingyan said and did to show that she was serious. But she also knew that it would be rude to do so. Yun Qingyan nodded. Go ahead. Yes. Meng Qi felt a wave of disappointment and looked at Yun Qingyan reluctantly. She didn't know how long it would be before she could see him again. But Yun Qingyan was willing to show up and teach her. Even if it was only for a short time, she was satisfied and didn't dare to ask for anything more. What's wrong? Yun Qingyan turned around and saw Meng Qi's reluctant gaze. His lips curled up slightly, and his mood improved a little. Even his voice became gentler. Do you have any other questions? He asked patiently. No. Meng Qi shook her head and instantly regretted it. Then go. Yun Qingyan flicked his sleeves. Meng Qi didn't move, but her body flew backward involuntarily. The white-robed man was getting farther and farther away from her, and he was becoming more and more blurry. She knew that she was about to leave and didn't know when she would see him again. Then Ji Wujiang, just as she was about to leave, Yun Qingyan's voice suddenly sounded clearly in her ears. Don't listen. Yes. Meng Qi immediately agreed. Even if he didn't say it, she wouldn't listen. She definitely wouldn't acknowledge Ji Wujiang as her master. Meng Qi was only stunned for a moment. Then, she saw the scenery around her change, and she stood in the room of the inn again. She lowered her head and looked at the outer sky jade scroll in her palm, which was already warm from holding it. Meng Qi subconsciously reached out and touched her cheek. Was she dreaming just now? Yun, Qing, Yin, but if she was dreaming, she shouldn't have dreamt of his name, and it was so clear. Meng Qi lowered her head slightly and looked at the outer sky jade scroll in her palm. And the method to set up the array, she definitely couldn't think of it just by dreaming. She pinched her own cheeks hard. Ah, Meng Qi whispered softly. It hurt. It seemed that she wasn't dreaming. She immediately became happy and quickly jumped off the bed. The feeling of standing on solid ground was incomparably real. Meng Qi was so happy that her chest almost burst. She quickly walked to the door of the room and pulled it open. Humph. As soon as the door opened, Ji Wujiang's cold snort sounded. The black-robed man stood at the courtyard wall outside the door in boredom, leaning against the wall as he stood. There was a big tree above his head, and the sunlight shone through the leaves and scattered on his face. It also made the 3 black scars on Ji Wujiang's face more obvious. Ji Wujiang looked a little strange and terrifying in this state. Meng Qi glanced at him with a smile, and only felt that even he looked much more pleasing to the eye. What are you laughing at? Ji Wujiang snorted again. Have you thought of how to use those 3 arrays? What are you secretly doing behind closed doors? Don't you know that we don't have much time left? Yes. Meng Qi nodded with a smile. At this time, even if Ji Wujiang was still full of sarcasm and ridicule, she didn't feel that it was harsh at all. So we'll go find the mayor immediately, Meng Qi said, and quickly walked out of the inn. I've already thought of what to do. So, just now. Ji Wujiang looked at the unconcealable joy on her body. What happened? Nothing. Meng Qi shook her head. You're lying to my face. Ji Wujiang snorted again. But he also knew that this stubborn little girl wouldn't say anything if she didn't want to tell him something. He caught up with Meng Qi and looked at her as if she was a happy little oriole, and even her footsteps became lighter. Her face, which was usually expressionless, was full of smiles, and she looked lively and beautiful. Ji Wujian was familiar with Meng Qi's senior sister, Lu Qingran, and knew that she was a rare beauty even in the 3,000 worlds where there were countless beauties. He didn't think that Meng Qi was very good-looking before. He didn't expect her to be so elegant when she was happy, and she didn't seem to lose out to Lu Qingran. Mayor. In just a moment, the two of them found the mayor of Stormy Town next to the inn. The mayor's worried face had already relaxed, as if even if only 2 reinforcements came, he was still confident that these 2 people could protect Stormy Town. We've decided to ambush the Soaring Snake sect halfway. Meng Qi didn't hesitate and directly stated her intentions. Oh! The mayor's expression finally changed. He turned his head to look at Meng Qi, and his eyes were full of surprise. Ambush? Yes. Meng Qi nodded and said with certainty, instead of waiting for death, it's better to think of a way to fight back. We're going to ambush the Soaring Snake sect outside Stormy Town, so that the safety of the town's ordinary residents can be guaranteed to the greatest extent. She said, otherwise, with just the 2 of us, we won't be able to take care of everything. After Meng Qi finished speaking, she looked with burning eyes at the mayor. She didn't dare to miss any expression on the other's face. This was a test of the great competition. She wasn't sure if the other would agree to the method she thought of. This was the Xinglin Holy Land, a test for medical Xiao. Fellow's words are reasonable. Unexpectedly, the mayor only thought for a moment and then nodded. Instead of waiting for death, it's better to fight back. But, he asked Meng Qi, do you need me to do anything for you? We need help. Meng Qi turned and exchanged a look with Ji Wujian. She said, he and I will go ahead of time to prepare and ambush the Soaring Snake sect. Please gather all Xiozha above Jinan in town and leave a quarter to guard Stormy Town. The rest will meet us 30 li away as soon as possible. All right. The mayor nodded. He thought, and then suddenly handed a small pouch to Meng Qi. Since the 2 of you are preparing to ambush the Soaring Snake sect, you must be able to use this. This is... Meng Qi lowered her head and sent a bit of Ling energy into the pouch. Her expression suddenly became strange as she looked in shock at the mayor. What's inside? Ji Wujian asked curiously. 7 object powder. Meng Qi suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was a large box of 7 object powder in the pouch. That was the poison they had encountered in the last test. The 2 of them had spent a lot of effort to get rid of the poison of the 7 object powder. They hadn't thought that they would get this from the mayor of Stormy Town, who needed their protection here. As though he guessed Meng Qi's thoughts, the mayor smiled freely and said faintly, there are countless ling grasses and herbs in the world. What is a poisonous grass? What is a medicinal grass? Meng Qi stilled. To save people is a medicinal grass, but to hurt people is a poisonous grass. As the mayor spoke, he walked forward. I will follow fellow Taoist instructions and let the cultivators meet up with the 2 of you. The 2 of you, please go and do your work. The lives of all the residents of Stormy Town are in your hands. Please do your best to protect everyone. Meng Qi held the pouch and looked thoughtfully at the mayor's back as he walked away. She suddenly seemed to understand the meaning of the existence of this barrier. The ancient almighty seniors did not leave behind this holy land and this trial boundary just to give their juniors some elixirs or elixir formulas. They were teaching the true principles of medical cultivation. Meng Qi exhaled and threw the pouch into her storage pouch. Let's go, she said and started to walk out of the town. They still couldn't use flying treasures here. As cultivators, Meng Qi and Ji Wujian weren't slow. They quickly left the west gate and headed in the direction of the Soaring Snake sect, arriving at a place about 30 miles away from Stormy Town. This place? Meng Qi looked in front of her. It seems very suitable for an ambush. The outside of Stormy Town was originally a flat plain, empty and flat. But the place where Meng Qi and the others were now was an undulating mountain range. Those green mountains were extremely tall, and there was only a wide road in the middle. But compared to the flat plain before, this was a very suitable place to set up a formation and carry out an ambush. It seems like it was specially prepared for us. Meng Qi muttered and took out the materials she had prepared to set up the formation from her storage pouch. Ji Wujiang didn't make a move. He stood to the side with cold eyes and made up his mind to see what Meng Qi was going to do. He wanted to see if she really had an idea or if she couldn't handle it, and asked him for help in the end. The green-robed girl had a slender figure. She didn't even look at Ji Wujiang and started to move nimbly. Ji Wujiang looked at her for a moment. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows slightly and his eyes flickered. All right, he had decided. When he got out of this damn enchantment, he would immediately tie up Meng Qi and force her to acknowledge him as her master. He wouldn't even delay for an incense stick to burn. Chapter 84. Bright light vine, smoke wave sand, geomagpie feather. These things were all formation materials that could be obtained in large quantities from the general store in Windrain Town. Meng Qi had a lot of them in her storage bag. These materials were not valuable. Even in the 3,000 worlds, one could buy a lot of them from the Cloud Immortal Pavilion or the general stores in the major cities by spending some spirit stones. From the moment Meng Qi and Ji Wujiang met the mayor and decided to ambush the Soaring Snake sect midway to intercept and kill them, they ran all over the town to prepare materials, learn new formations, make a plan, and find the mayor. It took them more than 2 hours to arrive at this place 15 kilometers away from Windrain Town. They still had a little more than 4 hours left. Meng Qi's movements were very neat. Even though she knew that there would be a fierce battle, she still had a faint smile on her face. The tip of her eyebrows and the corners of her eyes were like a spring breeze. Her eyes were full of ripples and light flowed in them. Ji Wujiang saw that she was setting up formations. Otherwise, he might have thought that she was setting up a place to meet her lover. He clicked his tongue. He also knew that it was useless to force Meng Qi to tell him something that she did not want to tell him. His gaze landed on the small formation that had already been set up on the ground. Meng Qi's movements were extremely neat. In the time it took for an incense stick to burn, 3 groups of tripartite small killing formations had already ambushed on the only main road in the valley. She hummed an unknown tune. Amidst the cheerful tune, the materials for the formation poured out from her slender fingers one after another. Ji Wujiang looked at her familiar movements. Who would have thought that she had learned these formations more than 2 hours ago? Give me the materials. Ji Wujiang looked for a moment, then slowly walked to Meng Qi's side and reached out to her. Meng Qi was startled, but still gave him a portion of the formation materials in her storage bag. Ji Wujiang looked at the surrounding green mountains that towered into the clouds. The mountains were majestic and steep, piercing straight into the clouds. Even cultivators would not climb over the peak of the mountains. His gaze swept across the mountain walls on both sides. His body spread out, and he leaped onto the mountain walls like a bird. Ji Wujiang had the intention to show off his skills in front of Meng Qi. He tapped lightly on the mountain wall with the tip of his foot and spread out his body. Like a bird, he flitted across the steep mountain wall. His hands did not stop moving, and the materials were thrown out like flowing water. From time to time, fluorescent lights would light up on the mountain wall. Ji Wujiang's fingers were like knives, and sharp spiritual energy directly pierced into the mountain wall, sending the materials in along with it. He felt a little proud in his heart. He turned around and stood on a protruding rock on the mountain wall, and then turned his head to look at Meng Qi. The green-robed girl was still like a hard-working ant, diligently working on the ground. She didn't even bother to look at him. Ji Wujiang. Meng Qi, he called out. Meng Qi looked up at Ji Wujiang. On the precipitous mountain wall, the black-robed youth stood against the wind. The wind blew through the valley, and their robes fluttered in the wind. Ji Wujiang's hair was slightly messy, and a few strands brushed past his perfect left cheek. What's wrong? Meng Qi's gaze swept across his face, and then landed on the mountain wall without any reluctance. Her eyes lit up as she looked at the formation on the mountain wall. Amazing! Meng-Chi raised his chin slightly in praise from the bottom of his heart. Ji Wujiang chuckled and asked as if he didn't care. How many do you need? He had left 100 ghosts and charming formation on the mountain wall. The more the better, Meng-Chi said casually, and then lowered his head to continue working. About 6 hours later, the last bit of material in Meng-Chi's hand fell to the ground. A faint light flashed, and it quickly sank into the soil and disappeared. She took a few steps back, almost standing outside the passage between the two mountains, and looked at the endless formation in front of her. That's right. It was a formation group, in the middle of countless 3 small killing formations. The smoke-gathering formation was stacked layer by layer, almost stretching from the entrance of the valley to more than a mile ahead. On both sides of the mountain wall, the 100 ghosts and charming formation was crisscrossing forward. Ji Wujiang nimbly swept over and landed beside Meng-Chi, looking forward with her side by side. Tisk! He had almost never fought side by side with someone like this, and there was an indescribable feeling. He glanced sideways at the girl standing beside him. Her cheeks were crimson, and there were fine beads of sweat on her forehead. A few strands of hair stuck to her cheeks, and it actually made Ji Wujiang feel more and more pleasing to the eye. Meng-Chi was in a good mood, and when she felt Ji Wujiang's gaze, she turned and smiled at him. She took out the medicinal herbs she found from the pharmacy from her storage bag and took them out together with the small bronze cauldron. She threw the medicinal herbs she needed into the small cauldron, and her fingers quickly drew the changes of the great fire formation on the ground. Although he had already seen it once, Ji Wujiang's eyebrows still twitched slightly every time he saw Meng-Chi use the great fire formation to refine medicine. Puff, puff! In just a moment, white smoke came out of the medicinal cauldron. Soon, Meng-Chi put the refined medicine into a porcelain bottle and threw in a pile of medicinal herbs. What's this? This time, even though Ji Wujiang was considered an expert in using poisons, he couldn't see what Meng-Chi was refining. When I was trying out pill recipes before, I missed a medicinal herb. The refined medicine doesn't have any medicinal effect, but when it breaks, it will burst out a large amount of white smoke, making people unable to see clearly. I added 2 more medicinal herbs, and it will also make people's eyes stinging when they are in the white smoke, and they will keep crying. Meng-Chi paused and said, I think it's quite interesting, so I named it Little Smoke Pill. As she spoke, she pursed her lips and chuckled, and 2 shallow dimples appeared at the corners of her lips. As Meng-Chi spoke, she took out the refined medicine again, and threw in a 3rd batch of medicinal herbs. Ah! She suddenly exclaimed softly. What's wrong? Ji Wujiang asked. My medical skills have reached the peak of the 3rd stage. Meng-Chi tilted her head slightly and said. Ji Wujiang. He had already discovered that ever since he said that he would let Meng-Chi acknowledge him as her master, the girl's hostility towards him suddenly faded a lot. However, he suddenly felt that he should be flustered. This girl clearly had a true love for medicine. Moreover, she was only at the 5th stage of the Foundation establishment realm, right? Her medical skills had already reached the peak of the 3rd stage. Her talent in medicine didn't seem to be any lower than her talent in formations. Ji Wujiang took a deep breath. In the flames of the great fire formation, the bitter medicinal fragrance once again rose in spirals. Meng-Chi put away the newly refined medicine, stood up, and flicked her finger. Hiss, hiss. The sound of the air breaking sounded. Those Dan medicines flew steadily towards the formation in front of them, and landed in the eye of the formation at the center of the 3-talent little killing formation. Her figure spread out, a large handful of ling stones in her hand, and she quickly flew over the formation they had set up. 15 minutes later, Meng-Chi returned from the mountain valley. She lightly landed next to Ji Wujiang, a smile blooming on her face. Done. Just as Meng-Chi's voice landed, a flurry of hurried footsteps came from behind them. She turned around and saw about 60 to 70 Xiuzhe hurrying towards them under the lead of the mayor of Wind Rain Town. Fellow Taoists, The mayor stopped in front of them and turned around to point at the Xiozha behind him. He introduced, "There are 72 Xiozha here. 17 of them are Yuanying, the rest are Jindan. Other than leaving behind some to guard Wind Rain Town, I have brought all of them here." "Many thanks, Mayor." Meng Qi raised her hands in a bow to him. "I'll leave this place to you too. I'm going back to Wine Rain Town to arrange for guards." The mayor nodded at Meng Qi, and then turned and hurried back the way they had come. Meng Qi's gaze swept across the Xiozha. 17 Yuanying and more than 50 Jindan. The situation was better than she had imagined. These 70 Xiozha were almost all sword Xiao and spell Xiao. There were men and women, old and young. Meng Qi coughed lightly and turned to look at Ji Wujiong. "What are you looking at me for?" Ji Wujiong said, "You arrange it." He was more knowledgeable than Meng Qi, and had already guessed the meaning of setting up the boundary of the Xinglin Holy Land Tournament. Meng Qi was a medical Xiao, and he was not, even though he wanted to pull the little girl into the formation Xiao camp and inherit the legacy of his sect. But he did not need to argue with Meng Qi on this matter. "All right." Meng Qi nodded. "Please divide into 2 groups. One group will go to the back of the formation we left behind and lie in ambush on the cliff. Wait for the Soaring Snake sect to enter the formation, and then block them from behind. The other group, please stay where you are, and prepare to kill the members of the Soaring Snake sect that charge out." Ji Wujiong. This arrangement was really simple. Meng Qi had not thought to make it so complicated. This was the boundary of the medical Xiao. The test of the medical Xiao would not be focused on killing. Those Xiozha were very obedient and quickly divided into 2 groups. Even the sword Xiao and spell Xiao were grouped together, and then they waited for Meng Qi's next orders. "You." Meng Qi pointed at the group on the left. "Go to the back of the mountain valley." Ji Wujiong raised a finger, and a thin line of Ling energy flashed out. It drew a safe path for people to pass through the formation that the two had worked on for an entire afternoon. There were 9 Yuanying Xiozha in the group that Meng Qi pointed out. 5 swords and 4 spells. Those 4 spell Xiao were especially skilled in large-scale offensive spells. Under the lead of these 9 people, there were also some Jindan Xiozha following behind them. They followed the path that Ji Wujiong pointed out, and quickly passed through the mountain valley to find a place to ambush. "You will stay here," Meng Qi said to the remaining Xiozha. There were 8 Yuanying Xiozha left, and 5 sword Xiao. Supposedly, they came from the same sect and could form a sword formation. They were very powerful in both offense and defense. These Xiozha spread out to the 2 sides of the Green Mountain and hid their tracks. Meng Qi and Ji Wujiong also hid at the entrance of the mountain valley. They had already discussed briefly. When the disciples of the Soaring Snake sect activated the formation, the Xiozha lying in ambush on the other side of the mountain valley would immediately act and force them into the dense formation. Meng Qi leaned against the mountain wall. There seemed to be the sun rising and the moon setting inside the barrier. After a busy day, night had completely covered the earth. Occasionally, a bit of starlight could be seen in the sky. Under the sky, the surrounding green mountains appeared especially solemn. She looked up at the sky. What flashed through her mind was the scene of Yun Qingyan seriously teaching her formations. She actually saw him again so soon. It really was unbelievable. Meng Qi's hand that was hanging by her side clenched tightly. She gripped the handle of the small silver medicine knife tightly in her hand. "Meng Qi," Ji Wujiong suddenly said in a low voice. "Later, you can take a look at the sword formation of those 5 sword Xiao." He paused and then said, "Most of the sword formations circulating in the 3,000 worlds were born from ancient formations. However, they have only learned a little and have not been able to use the essence of formations at all. It is just a simple posture, and it can only scare Xiozha, who do not understand formations." Ji Wujiong's tone was as harsh as usual. Meng Qi was already used to his way of speaking. She also knew that since the other party had specifically pointed it out for her to see the sword formation, there must be something good about it. She was about to nod to show that she understood. Suddenly, Yun Qingyin's voice sounded in Meng Qi's mind. The sword formation is indeed very simple. If you want to learn, I will teach you. Just as he finished speaking, he coughed lightly a few times. Yes. Meng Qi was very worried about his body. When a Xiuzhi cultivated to a certain level, they rarely got sick. For someone like Yun Qinyin, whose voice was weak and who coughed from time to time, it was not as simple as an ordinary injury. He might have injured his great Tao foundation or his spiritual ocean. Are you all right? Meng Qi could not help but ask in her mind. I'm fine. Although Yun Qinyin said that, he still coughed lightly. It's fine. Focus on the ambush. He paused and said lightly, Don't be distracted chatting. Yes. Meng Qi responded respectfully again. She hurriedly focused her mind. They were facing a great enemy, and the other party had a powerhouse in the spirit-severing stage. They were outnumbered. She really shouldn't be distracted. Master, no. Senior Yun Qinyin was right. What were you thinking about just now? Did you hear what I said? Ji Wujiong's voice sounded again. Don't talk, Meng Qi said in a low voice. They should be here soon. Listen. Her expression suddenly tensed up. Ji Wujiong also shut his mouth, and his expression became serious. His eyes dimmed slightly, and he looked towards the front of the valley. They're here. Ji Wujiong's voice was slightly hoarse, and he reached out to support himself on the mountain wall beside him. They brought poisonous insects, he said again. There are quite a lot of them. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. She had already considered this point, so she had left a lot of thousand crane formations on both sides of the three-talent small killing formation. Goshawks were strong and sharp, and they soared in the sky. They were the biggest nemesis of poisonous insects and snakes. Moreover, she had seen the goshawks summoned by the 1,000 crane formation deal with Ji Wujiong's ghostly shadows neatly. She believed that they would not be afraid of those poisonous insects and snakes. Ji Wujiong raised his hand and said to the Sword Xiu and Dharma Xiu behind him, Be on guard. Those cultivators immediately started to move silently. Meng Qi did not hear any sound, but she could feel that there seemed to be a sharp chill in the air. She looked back slightly and saw that the Sword Xiu's long swords were already floating beside them. Cold light flashed in the night, and they looked exceptionally sharp. Most of the Dharma Xiu had life bond talismans beside them. The life bond talismans of the 3 Yuanying Dharma Xiu had already been completely refined. They floated around them, emitting a faint fluorescent light. They had already formed hand seals. They were just waiting for the enemy to appear, and the hand seals would cover the sky and earth as they attacked forward. Meng Qi held her breath, and even she tightened her grip on the silver medicine knife in her hand. Even though she did not cultivate the silver moon sword diagram to Ji Wujiong standards, it was a pretty good offensive spell. Don't leave behind me. Ji Wujiong happened to turn his head and ordered Meng Qi in a low voice. His long robe suddenly moved without any wind. A small and exquisite amethyst 8 trigrams disc flashed out of the darkness and hung by his face. Formation Xiu. At this time, Ji Wujiong did not forget to prove to Meng Qi that Formation Xiu were very strong. Even in battle, they will not lose to Sword Xiu and Dharma Xiu. A strange light flashed through his dark blue eyes. Meng Qi looked carefully. After Ji Wujiong finished speaking, he suddenly thought of something. He turned and reached out a hand to Meng Qi. Give me some Ling stones. Meng Qi. Nothing could be seen from Ji Wujiong's injured side of his face. But at this time, the amethyst 8 trigrams disc was floating beside his face, and a faint fluorescent light shone on the other side of his face. He met Meng Qi's surprised gaze, and a dark red color seemed to flash across his face. Ji Wujiong gritted his teeth and was a little angry from embarrassment. I'll pay you back 100 times after we get out of here. No need. Meng Qi's lips curled up slightly. This was the barrier of the Xinglin's sacred ground. If she could pass the test, she would still be the one benefiting. She was still clear about this kind of thing. She took out a handful of 8th grade Ling stones and handed them to Ji Wujiong and a few ninth-grade ling stones. You're so rich? Ji Wujiong looked at the ninth grade and eighth grade ling stones in his hand in disbelief. Then back then, as he spoke, he suddenly shut his mouth. Huh? Meng Qi was confused. Back then what? It's nothing. Ji Wujiong put away the ling stones. What he wanted to say was that since Meng Qi was so rich, she actually had the Cultivator Alliance step in and force Lu Qingran to pay back the money for a few ninth-grade ling stones. Even he was in a difficult situation, and he actually didn't see that Meng Qi, a foundation-building cultivator, was so rich. She was doing much better than he was. Medical cultivation. Meng Qi guessed Ji Wujiong's thoughts and said half-jokingly, "It's very rich. It's not too late to change to medical cultivation." Ji Wujiong snorted coldly. His fingers shook slightly, and the pitch-black narrow blade appeared in his hand again. He turned around proudly, and his gaze seemed to pass through the valley to look at the unknown enemies in front of him. Formation cultivators have true, unparalleled combat power. In the valley, the rustling sound became clearer and clearer. However, in the dark night, it was still silent. Then, lights suddenly lit up in front of the valley. They're making a move. Meng Qi jumped up and quickly walked over to the valley. Ji Wujiong hurriedly followed. Sure enough, they saw that after the light flashed in front of them, the light of spells blotted out the sky and covered the earth, and a rumbling sound suddenly sounded. Then there was the sound of long swords piercing through the air, and there was a whooshing sound. Chaotic shouts and screams could be heard. They were a little far away, so Meng Qi couldn't hear what they were saying. Just as the commotion was getting more and more chaotic, a cold voice suddenly rang out. That's all there is to it. You guys continue forward. That voice was obviously very cold and not loud, but it clearly reached Meng Qi and Ji Wujiong's ears. It sounded very uncomfortable, like a poisonous snake crawling over one's back, causing goosebumps to rise all over one's body. Meng Qi and Ji Wujiong looked at each other again. The person who spoke should be the spirit-severing cultivator of the Soaring Snake Sect, the sect master of the Soaring Snake Sect, the one who threatened to slaughter the entire Wind Rain town, and also their most troublesome enemy this time. As soon as the sect master of the Soaring Snake Sect finished speaking, the chaotic shouts suddenly disappeared. Hurried footsteps sounded, and about 100 people rushed toward Meng Qi and the others. The light of the spell formation lit up. Immediately, someone screamed a warning. There's an ambush. There's also an ambush in front. Shut up. The sect master of the Soaring Snake Sect's cold voice sounded again. It's just a small spell formation. Its power is limited. Charge forward, and those who turn back will be killed. A Soaring Snake Sect disciple screamed a warning. Rustle, 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 rustle. The sound suddenly became louder. Meng Qi focused her gaze in front of her and suddenly felt a little nauseous. Behind the Soaring Snake Sect disciples, the entire ground seemed to have turned into a floor mat that was constantly moving. Countless venomous snakes twisted their slender bodies and slithered towards the exit of the valley. Above the venomous snakes, there was a black cloud formed by venomous insects. The sound of their wings flapping could be heard unceasingly, and they were also flying towards them. It's my turn. A bloodthirsty glint flashed in Ji Wujiong's eyes. He lightly flicked his finger, and a handful of 8-stage spirit stones flew towards the mountain wall. Boom! A light sound was heard, and the mountain walls on both sides of the valley shone brightly. The 2,400 ghosts and charming formations that he had left behind were all activated. Countless ghostly figures emerged from the mountain walls while giggling, and quickly ran towards the Soaring Snake Sect disciples in the valley. They did not even need to injure the disciples. They only needed to obstruct them for a moment, and the Soaring Snake Sect disciples would be injured by the long sabers, silver threads, and the concealed weapons that covered the sky. There were also some ghostly figures that rushed towards the venomous snakes and insects. As they giggled, they grabbed the venomous snakes and tore them in half. How many formations did you actually set up? Even Ji Woojeong was a little speechless when he saw this. The formations on the ground lit up unceasingly as they were activated one after another, and he faintly felt his hair stand on end. Meng Qi said, "In any case, the materials are all used up." As she spoke, she threw out another handful of spirit stones. The Thousand Crane Formation was instantly activated, and countless dark blue goshawks soared into the sky from both sides. Compared to the ghostly figures, the goshawks' movements were even faster. They swooped down from the sky, and with a swipe of their claws, 5 or 6 venomous snakes would be torn in half. Ji Woojeong slowly exhaled. When Meng Qi became ruthless, she was actually quite ruthless. This was even more in line with her temperament. In an instant, the valley seemed to have turned into hell. The soaring snake sect disciples were caught off guard by this wave of attacks from the formations, and they were in a complete mess. As the leader screamed, a golden core disciple of the soaring snake sect with a lower cultivation level collapsed. Immediately after, the second, the third, the nascent soul elders might still be able to hold on for a while, but at least half of the golden core disciples were unable to withstand the inescapable net that Meng Qi and Ji Woojeong had set up together. Ranwina, Net Meng Qi watched as more and more soaring snake sect disciples collapsed. "Be careful." Ji Woojeong suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm, and abruptly retreated with her in tow. With a loud boom, a ball of spell light and shadow exploded where Meng Qi and the others were standing just a moment ago. A nascent soul elder of the soaring snake sect, whose robes were stained with blood and whose cheeks were covered in fine scars, finally broke free from the densest area of the formations and rushed to the entrance of the valley. He wore a black robe and coldly stared at Meng Qi and Ji Woojeong. "Who are you, little brats? How dare you obstruct my soaring snake sect's business?" Meng Qi didn't show any courtesy at all and waved her hand. With a long swish, 5 sharp swords pierced through the air from 5 different directions. The 5 sword cultivators, who were also nascent soul cultivators, shouted in unison. That soaring snake sect elder didn't even have time to say a second word before he screamed and died under the long swords. However, this was only the beginning. More and more soaring snake sect, nascent soul elders began to break free from the formations and rushed out of the valley. Ji Woojeong's robes fluttered slightly, and in a flash, he blocked in front of Meng Qi. "Stand behind me." His voice was solemn, and he completely protected her behind him. "Okay." Meng Qi nodded obediently. She knew that in the following battle, as long as she didn't drag them down and become their weakness, she would be of the greatest help. Ji Woojeong turned around, and his hand, which was holding a pitch-black narrow saber, moved as fast as lightning and circled around Meng Qi to draw a formation. "Stay here." As he spoke, he was about to flick spirit stones into the formation. However, Meng Qi's movements were faster than his. She had already flicked the remaining 8th-stage spirit stones in her hand into the formation. Rays of light lit up, firmly protecting her in the center. Inside, Ji Woojeong only finished speaking at this time. Through the light of the formation, he looked at Meng Qi, who was standing prettily in the center of the formation with a "I'm very obedient, I won't cause trouble" look on her face. In the end, the corners of his lips slowly rose. "Good girl." Meng Qi seemed to have heard Ji Woojeong talking. However, the entrance of the valley had already fallen into a fierce battle. The sound of spells exploding, the sound of long swords piercing through the air, and all kinds of lights and shadows swirling in the air. She didn't hear it clearly. Ji Woojeong held his pitch-black narrow saber, and his sword chi swept out. As his robes fluttered in the wind, he took a step forward. "Look carefully." Ji Woojeong was in midair, and the amethyst 8 trigrams disc flashed. Without turning his head, he said to Meng Qi, "It's a battle between formation cultivators." Ji Woojeong, who was wearing a black robe, stabbed his narrow saber into the ground. His figure was as fast as a ghost. In the blink of an eye, he finished drawing the formation and retreated. Several spirit stones flew into the formation in front of him. Countless lightning bolts suddenly struck the several soaring serpent sect disciples within 70 to 80 feet of the formation. The lights and shadows were gorgeous, illuminating the 3 pitch-black scars on Ji Wujiang's face. His black robe fluttered, and even his hair was blown by the strong wind caused by the lightning bolts. In a moment, screams were heard, accompanied by a burnt smell. Meng Qi was dazzled by the sight. So powerful, she muttered in a low voice, completely subconsciously. Meng Qi's gaze moved slightly. The black-robed young man's face suddenly became extremely pale. She immediately thought of Ji Wujiang's body. It was strong at times and weak at other times, and it seemed to be somewhat strange. Ji Wujiang, Meng Qi called out loudly. She took out an entire bottle of Dark North pills from her storage bag and threw it at him. For you. She paused and said again, be careful. In the beast house in the storage bag, the little white tiger, who was lying lazily on the bed with its eyes restrained, suddenly opened its eyes. It stretched out its paw and gently knocked on the bed. In Meng Qi's mind, Yun Qingyin's voice suddenly sounded again. You want to deal with that soaring serpent sect master? He can't, Yun Qingyin said calmly. Didn't he say that she could call him by his name? Senior? Senior, Meng Qi called out softly in her mind. Their footwork seems to have come from an array. Yes, Yun Qingyin responded casually. Meng Qi didn't say anything else. Her gaze was focused on the 5 sword cultivators. She held the silver medicine knife in her hand. Seeing that those people couldn't attack her for the time being, she squatted. Meng Qi squatted down. She looked up at the footwork of the 5 sword cultivators while drawing on the ground with the medicine knife. Oh! Meng Qi quickly drew a rough array diagram on the ground. However, the 5 sword cultivators each occupied a corner and almost never changed positions with each other. Therefore, the array diagram drawn based on their footwork wasn't complete. Meng Qi thought for a moment. Then, she looked up at the trajectory of the swords in the air. The tips of the swords flashed with cold light. In just a moment, another elder of the soaring snake sect died under the 5 swords. She lowered her head and quickly completed the array. Then, she asked respectfully in a soft voice, Senior, what do you think, Yun Qingyin? Yun Qingyin interrupted Meng Qi. In terms of age, he could indeed be Meng Qi's senior. However, the calculation of the age of the demon cultivators was different from that of the cultivators in the 3,000 fields. I said that you can call me by my name, he said. Meng Qi called that Ji Wujiang, Chu Tianfeng, Qin Xiuma, and even Su Junmo. Didn't they all sound good? Which part of him looked like her senior? But Meng Qi was in a difficult position. In her heart, Yun Qingyin was like a god. She didn't dare to disobey his words. However, she really couldn't call him by his name. No buts. Yun Qingyin's tone was indifferent. I don't like being called senior. True Lord Yun. Meng Qi probed and called out again. There are so many people with the surname Yun in the 3 realms. Yun Qingyin said again. You and I are not relatives, so you can call me by my name. Meng Qi suddenly understood and quickly changed his words. Qing Yanzhenjun. True Lord was the respectful title given by the 3,000 fields to very powerful cultivators with very high realms. It seemed that the demon world and the demon world were the same. This time he shouldn't be angry, right? Meng Qi waited nervously. Yun Qingyin was silent for a moment before he finally said, Up to you. Yes. Seeing that the other party finally accepted, Meng Qi immediately became happy. Qin Yanzhen Jun, I drew the array diagram according to their footwork and sword techniques. Okay. Yun Qinyan responded in a low voice. He saw it just now, and he saw it very clearly. It had to be said that although Ji Wujiang's array formation was mediocre, he still had a good eye. Meng Qi's talent in array formations was completely beyond his expectations. Yun Qinyan now understood why Ji Wujiang wanted Meng Qi to be his disciple. Moreover, he also understood why the person who taught Meng Qi the array formation previously taught her the four extremes array and the stellar array. If it were him, he couldn't help but want to teach such a talented disciple everything. Qin Yanzhen Jun? Meng Qi called out softly again. Did I do something wrong? No, Yun Qinyan said. You did very well. He looked at the 5 elements array diagram drawn by Meng Qi and almost thought that she had learned this array before. He didn't need to teach her slowly. She only needed to correct a few small problems. Ah! Meng Qi suddenly stood up and looked forward. In the valley, dark blue goshawks could be seen soaring into the sky from time to time. At that moment, there was suddenly silence inside. Darkness replaced the original light of the array formation. A vast and mighty pressure poured out from inside. Even Meng Qi, who was standing in the distance and protected by Ji Wujiang's array formation, could not help but be affected by the pressure and shiver. CXZWW. Comet was the sect master of the Soaring Snake sect. It was the spirit-severing stage powerhouse who made people feel uncomfortable with just one sentence in the valley. Ji Wujiang obviously felt it too. He turned his head and quickly glanced at Meng Qi. Then he turned back and looked into the distance. He suddenly clenched his left fist and coughed a few times on his lips. Meng Qi's heart tightened, and she looked at Ji Wujiang worriedly. Fang Zheng took out the Dark North pill she gave him and threw 3 into his mouth in one go. Even Ji Wujiang could not help but look back at Meng Qi in surprise. He originally thought that Meng Qi, whose medical skills were only at the 3rd grade, would only be able to refine ordinary Dark North pills. Who knew that as soon as the pills entered his mouth, spiritual energy would flow into his spiritual sea from all directions like a trickle. Although it could not quickly replenish his spiritual sea, it was far better than those ordinary 3rd grade Dark North pills that could be bought on the market. Ji Wujiang's eyes moved slightly. Not only that, he used his divine consciousness to check his spiritual sea, which was originally riddled with holes and cracks, seemed to be a little better than before. Although it was only a little, it was enough to shock Ji Wujiang. Even he could not do anything about his spiritual sea, which was almost broken. He used countless spirit pills and miraculous medicines, but it did not improve at all. There was something wrong with Meng Qi's Dark North pills. Ji Wujiang quickly understood. But there was no hurry now. The most important thing now was to kill the Soaring Snake sect's sect master. He had to let Meng Qi see with his own eyes how powerful he was. He had to let her truly feel the power of a formation cultivator. In this way, perhaps he did not need to kidnap and force Meng Qi himself to change his mind and become a formation cultivator. The corners of Ji Wujiang's mouth raised slightly, and he clenched the pitch-black narrow saber in his hand. He flicked his finger, and the amethyst 8 trigrams disc rotated gently, and the purple light suddenly flourished. At the entrance of the valley, a figure wearing a long dark green robe slowly swept out. The cultivators who came to help had already cooperated with Ji Wujiang to kill 6 or 7 nascent soul elders of the Soaring Snake sect, as well as a dozen or so Golden Core disciples who escaped from the formation in the valley. Of course, they also suffered casualties. At this time, there were still 7 nascent soul cultivators, 5 of which were sword cultivators who knew sword formations. The remaining 2 nascent soul spell cultivators and some Golden Core cultivators. However, these cultivators were more or less injured. The moment the sect leader appeared, the disciples of the Soaring Snake sect seemed to be encouraged, and their spirits rose. They moved together, and forced the cultivators on Meng Qi's side to retreat, and then turned and ran quickly towards the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect. A group of idiots. The sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect looked coldly at his own disciples and snorted, "You can't even deal with these ants." His voice was still very cold. Every time he opened his mouth to speak, it was like there was an icy, poisonous snake covered in mucus crawling past. Meng Qi felt extremely uncomfortable when he heard this. When the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect finished speaking, he suddenly waved his sleeve. A strong gust of wind blew the disciples of the Soaring Serpent School, who were shouting "Master" and "Leader" while running towards him. Quite a few Gold Core disciples were even blown to the ground. "All of you retreat," the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect said coldly. The Soaring Snake sect disciples did not dare to disobey, and climbed up from the ground after being blown away, and carefully circled behind their sect leader. Even the nascent soul elders did not make a sound, and silently retreated behind him. "You dare to ambush us halfway." The sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect's gaze was like a poisonous snake's as it swept across the faces of Meng Qi and Ji Wujiang. "I originally planned to leave 20% of the cultivators of Wind Rain Town alive and become my Soaring Snake sect's lackeys. Since you are in such a hurry to die," he laughed strangely, "this seat will grant you your wish." When the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect finished speaking, he reached out, and a jade long whip appeared in his hand. The long whip did not look like anything. Meng Qi looked over and found that the long whip was alive. How was that a long whip? It was clearly an enormous jade poisonous snake. The poisonous snake seemed to have been tamed, its tail held in the hands of the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect, and did not dare to struggle. But its head was raised, its narrow eyes, like its master, coldly sweeping across Meng Qi and the others. It would occasionally spit out its forked tongue and make hissing sounds. "It's actually a jade-scaled snake," Ji Wujiang slowly said. "There's actually a brat who knows what's good for him." The sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect's gaze turned to Ji Wujiang's face and laughed strangely again. "This seat has always treasured talents. Kneel down now, acknowledge me as your master, and work for me from now on. Then I will spare your life." Ji Wujiang sneered. He was already arrogant enough. He didn't think there would be someone even more arrogant than him. "You only know a little trick. A guy who plays with snakes, insects, rats, and ants dares to make me acknowledge you as my master?" Ji Wujiang laughed coldly. "You are not worthy." He suddenly charged forward, the black narrow blade in his hand swiftly stabbing into the ground. The amethyst 8 trigrams disc beside him suddenly shone brightly. As the purple light flashed, a complete formation flew out of it and headed towards the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect. Amidst the strange laughter, the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect waved the jade-scaled snake whip and said coldly, "Small." Before he could finish his sentence, the formation that flew out of Ji Wujiang's amethyst 8 trigrams disc quickly landed on the ground and formed a formation. A purple light soared into the sky, and a huge snake head suddenly drilled out of the ground. The snake head moved very quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a complete purple snake was already coiled on the ground. The snake head was upright, and it also spat out its forked tongue, making hissing sounds, and rushed towards the sect leader of the Soaring Snake sect. Ji Wujiang coldly looked up. "I told you, even if it's a snake, you are still far from it." As he spoke, the pitch-black narrow blade had already finished drawing the last stroke on the ground. Whoosh! 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 The 9th stage spirit stones in Ji Wujiang's hand flew towards the 6 directions of the formation. Boom! A huge black tortoise suddenly appeared in the middle of the formation. The purple snake from before turned around, nimbly jumped onto the black tortoise, and raised its head to look at the Soaring Snake sect's elder. "Attack!" Ji Wujiang softly berated. His words were not only a signal for the black tortoise and purple snake to attack, but also a signal for all the Xiozhi to attack. 5 Yuaning sword Xiao moved slightly, and their gleaming long swords suddenly rose into the air, attacking the Soaring Snake sect's sect leader. A yuaning spell Xiao suddenly flew up, and a red lotus flew out from his side. Meng Qi just felt that the red lotus was somewhat familiar. Several golden core Xiaozhou were clearly further away, but at this time, they suddenly screamed and rolled on the ground, and quickly turned into balls of white light and disappeared. Meng Qi's small face was pale, and she clenched the medicine knife in her hand. If she could be stronger, she wouldn't have to stand here and be of no help. Meng Qi, Yun Qingyin's voice suddenly sounded again. You know how to change the formation of the Great Fire Formation. I'll teach you the second formation. Meng Qi was stunned, and then she heard Yun Qingyin say again, the Surging Waves Academy gave you the Tsang Ming powder. Now refine it for Ji Wujiong. But there's still time. Yun Qingyin said, Ji Wujiong is not so useless. He can hold on until you finish refining the medicine. But Meng Qi still wanted to say something. Yun Qingyin seemed to guess what she was going to say and interrupted her again. Ji Wujiong is in the spirit-severing stage, but his spiritual Ci is severely injured, and his cultivation has dropped. The Tsangming powder will not affect him much. All right, Meng Qi asked, how long will it take? 15 minutes, Yun Qingyin said confidently. If you can learn the second formation of the Great Fire Formation in one go. I can. Ji Wujiong, Meng Qi suddenly called out. She gritted her teeth and said, do you know the Tsangming powder? You have it? Ji Wujiong turned to look at Meng Qi and quickly said, give it to me. I need 15 minutes, Meng Qi said. No problem. Ji Wujiong quickly understood Meng Qi's meaning, and a red light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He snapped his fingers and turned to face the soaring snake sect master again. Leave it to me. Meng Qi took a deep breath. Qing Yanzhenjun, please advise me. You only have 5 seconds, Yun Qingyin said. Remember it clearly. Just as he finished speaking, a new formation diagram suddenly flashed in Meng Qi's mind. The first formation of the Great Fire Formation was the one she usually used to refine medicine. It was very simple and easy to control. It was yin. Back then, it was specially designed for her to use. Meng Qi gritted her teeth and looked at the second formation of the Great Fire Formation in front of her. The second formation was much more complicated. She didn't dare to be distracted at all and quickly memorized it. 5 seconds passed in the blink of an eye, and the formation diagram disappeared. Meng Qi held her breath and condensed her qi. She quickly lowered her head and began to draw the second formation of the Great Fire Formation on the ground. Her qi passed through the medicine knife and went straight into the soil. In the blink of an eye, she finished drawing the entire formation. Meng Qi almost lost her strength. The Great Fire Formation she used before was very simple, but this one was much more complicated. This time, however, it was a lot more complicated.